The story begins with a boy approaching a girl named Espen and telling her that he has something he wants to tell her. A boy stood in front of her, holding a bouquet of flowers. Despite his shyness, he asked Espen if she would marry him. Our heroine looked at him in bewilderment, thinking that she was expecting anyone but him. This was not supposed to happen in the future. In turn, the guy looked at her with puppy eyes and said that he really liked her. Espen at this point abruptly turned her head away, saying that she didn't want this. The guy approached her in confusion and asked her why, with tears in his eyes. He didn't need anyone but her. Well, this cute and sweet boy, who is standing in front of our heroine right now, will be the strongest man in the Empire in the future. People will call him the Devil Swordmaster, and he will also become the man she will hate more than anything else in the world. That was why Espen had such hatred towards him, and that was why she pushed him right now and rejected him again. Because of the strong push, the bouquet of flowers he was holding even fell out of the guy's hands. But the girl turned around and said, "I have to go," and began to move away. Our heroine herself understood that she should not have helped the boy who would become her sworn enemy in the future. Shortly after Espen ran away, an explosion of incredible proportions occurred right behind her. She certainly wasn't going to stop, but she assumed she was already crazy. She needed to leave the city as soon as possible. Turning around to check if everything was okay, our heroine, to her horror, realized that everything was not as she would have liked because there was this creepy guy behind her. Right after he appeared, another guy appeared, floating in the air. This is the second person our heroine should be wary of. The girl turned around, and the guy told her that he would help her, so she didn't have to worry. Coming even closer, he took her hands and said that in that case, she would have to choose him instead of that guy. Everything was so confusing and unclear that our heroine at that moment simply fell into a stupor. Now let's figure out what's going on. On the left, the boy who will be considered the strongest in the Empire. He will become the youngest leader of the Knightly Order. On the right, he is the future great magician. In turn, our heroine Espen is something of a time traveler who completely accidentally got mixed up with these two. But what happened anyway? The Heavenly Knights Order. This is by far the most powerful force in the Empire. Only talented knights and wizards can join it, and each candidate is carefully assessed by evaluating his achievements. Age, gender status. None of it mattered, because the main thing was ability. The Order is a place that almost every inhabitant of the Empire wants to join, and all because once you get there, you automatically become an object of envy and honor. 10 selected candidates from this order were named Royal Knights. At the moment, the head of the Knightly Order is a man who has been nicknamed the strongest man in the Empire. Of course, we are talking about the guy we already know, who at that time was already a big commander of the Heavenly Knightly Order. This is Xenoc Evine Black Knight. He is one of the 3 dukes of the Empire, as well as the youngest commander-in-chief. In turn, our heroine is no less popular among the knights. She was the vice commander of the Heavenly Knightly Order, Espen Shua. Our heroine is an orphan by origin, with a huge scar on her face. She is not perceived as a person who is higher in position. Everyone around her hates her. Our heroine simply couldn't spread her wings while she was trapped in the commander's shadow. Even she called herself a loser and hated Xenoc with all her heart. After a while, a conflict broke out in one of the offices. Espen, perplexed, hit the table and asked why this was happening. The leader of the first row at the ceremony is her role. The man scratched his head in surprise and said that, as he was told, everyone simply decided to change. Espen still said that they competed for the leading role at the ceremony, and she won a well-deserved victory. However, the man looked at her and asked if she really hoped for something with that face. Xenoc would have been a better fit for the role, since at least he didn't have a scar. The man said that this scar could not even be hidden by magic. Espen shouted in bewilderment. I said that she could wear a mask. However, he did not even want to listen to her. He explained to her that their task was to preserve the dignity of the royal family. The decision had already been made, and there was no turning back, so Lady Shua was free. Clenching her fist tightly, the girl said that in that case, she would talk to him personally. The day certainly didn't want to be hated, but it seemed like everything around was calling for that. As soon as the girl left the office, she couldn't come to her senses for a long time. She kept muttering something to herself with a dissatisfied face. On her way, she met Divan Cherer. He approached the vice commander, saying that he had heard that she had lost her place at the ceremony. But why? She had earned it. However, he then sighed and said that if Commander Zenok replaced her, it would be for the best. The girl guiltily lowered her gaze and did not even dare to say anything in response. As a child, our heroine lost everything in a fire: her loved ones, her home, all her belongings. The criminal was never found. Soon after, she discovered that she had amazing sword skills. If she had been recognized at that moment, perhaps people would have treated her differently. Even though she had talent and was superior to many other knights, she was unable to achieve more because of this man, Zenok. This is the most impenetrable wall for the royal knights. She hates him and wanted a chance to never meet him. However, that wasn't the only problem. Even in the competitions they took part in, he usually won. Looking at him, she couldn't understand why he was so perfect. That's what drove her to despair. Either way, she didn't want to live her life feeling inadequate. The story of how one could join a heavenly knightly order based on one's abilities slowly faded into the past. The aristocrats gained more power each time. Now it was only a matter of time before this place would finally rot. The girl understood that after all this, the neglect towards her would only increase, which meant it was time to leave. The saddest thing for Espen was that she had no family or home. Lately, she often wondered about the meaning of life. However, before she died, she wanted to defeat this monster at least once, or rather, before leaving here. She asked the commander to fight her, and this is her last request. Looking into his eyes, she understood that she was not particularly interested in winning or losing. For herself, she knew for sure. She would finish with this man she hated. At that moment, a surprised Zenok came close to Espen and asked if she was serious. The girl did not understand whether it was necessary to talk to her like that being so close. Anyway, she said she was serious, and after receiving a positive answer, the commander told her that he would be waiting for her at the training camp. Our heroine exhaled heavily and hurried away from the room. The guy watched her, and in bewilderment only said that her head was a complete mess. After some time, the action takes us to the street, where at that moment it suddenly started to rain. While preparing for the duel, Zenok suggested to the girl that they postpone their duel, since he didn't really want her to be upset by losing because of her victory. However, our heroine pointed to the time and said that he, as always, arrived on time. The girl sighed and told him that everything was fine. Looking confidently into his eyes, she told him that she was certainly not one of those people who didn't like the rain. Zenok said that it was very good. Soon after, he made a dash and rushed towards Espen at lightning speed. Our heroine assumed that he would attack so cunningly, so she managed to dodge his attack in time. She needed to focus on the commander's hand movements, and then she would be able to resist him. At that very moment, he began to swing again, but Espen caught him and made a dash towards him. Soon the blade was at his neck, so she told him that he had fallen for her trick. However, it is unclear how a devastating blow passed through her body and pierced her skin. Of course, the girl reflexively jumped to the side, because the pain was severe. Zenok looked at her as the raindrops washed his face, and he begged Espen to admit defeat. Our heroine was trying to even out her breathing right now, thinking that she needed to calm down. She was so close. Biting her lip, she began to rise again. Today was her last chance. The strategy was the same, so anything was possible. She would be able to defeat the commander. The most important thing in her case was to choose the best moment. Our heroine at that moment turned to him and said that he always came like clockwork. The girl even said that this was exactly what she liked about him. She respected him, and only now did she begin to understand that she had developed an inferiority complex because many people around her simply hated her. It probably wasn't his fault, but nothing has changed since then. She likes the idea that she won't pick up a sword again, because this is her last battle. While watching Espen's attacks, the commander always noticed that the first attack was always a horizontal cut. He also always noticed that her gaze was literally endlessly focused on his hand. And besides, she continued to swing at him with all her might. At that very moment, a very bright light appeared behind Espen, which even began to blind Zenok. Thanks to this, the girl was able to take advantage of this moment and still began to attack him. Soon there was a huge explosion that began to spread in different directions. At that very moment, Zenok fell to the ground. He immediately began to remember the beginning of the battle and why exactly they started at 5 o'clock and began the battle despite the weather. Seeing the dawn, he understood that she had certainly not chosen this particular time by chance. Wiping the raindrops from her face, the girl asked the commander if the weather had affected the outcome of the battle. Hadn't it? As a result, Espen Shua is the owner of 99 losses out of 100 duels, but now the owner of one desired victory. Soon the action shifts to evening. The girl was walking through the evening city, thinking that, for some reason, she didn't want to go and treat her wounds. She understood that she could even die like that, but she didn't really care. Wait, is that a rabbit? Right at that moment, a cart appeared out of nowhere and rushed at full speed towards the harmless animal. Our heroine rushed forward in horror, thinking that it was dangerous, and it seemed too late. But she still didn't want to leave this poor rabbit in trouble. Of course, the driver who was driving the cart noticed the girl running out onto the solid line too late, but he still began to stop the cart with all his might. The girl fell to the ground anyway, but the last thing she did was wrap her arms around the rabbit. The guy jumped up in confusion and asked if she was dead. What should he do in this situation? Soon, he climbed back into the cart and headed. Even Espen couldn't even do anything because she had used up all her energy. The girl decided that she would die alone. Fortunately, she ended her career in the knightly order with a victory, but her life was too short. Then she didn't even think that she would be given another life, and that she would again meet the man she hated with all her soul and in exactly this guise. After some time, the girl was lying on the grass, not understanding why her body hurt so much. Immediately, a picture appeared in her head of her running after a rabbit and soon being hit by a carriage. Starting to rise, albeit with difficulty, she still tried to understand what kind of place this was. Espen raised her head and noticed only trees and a lake around her, which was illuminated by the moonlight. It was quite surprising because she thought she was already dead, by the way she felt how dry her throat was. At that moment, she decided to get up and go to the water to take at least a sip of water. But suddenly, the girl noticed her reflection. She immediately screamed in confusion because it wasn't just her face, but her body had changed too. Espen didn't understand what was going on. Her previously trained body, which is the property of a knight, where did it go? She fell to the ground in bewilderment, not even understanding why her body was so loose. Soon she heard a strange rustling sound, so she raised her head and noticed a strange creature in front of her, who happily told our heroine that she had finally come to her senses. Of course, the first thing our heroine asked was who he was and why he was talking to her. The cute rabbit said that he was the deity of fate, Lepus. By the way, he decided to say that she might not thank him for saving her. Our heroine thought about it. She immediately remembered the rabbit she had saved from under the wheels of the carriage. Could it really be him? After all, at that moment, she didn't really understand what was happening around her, so she took him for an ordinary animal. Yet now, looking at him, she realized that this was not at all an ordinary rabbit, as she had thought. Approaching him, she asked what help he was talking about. Did he mean that he helped her by turning her into this? Lepus said that everything was correct. The girl immediately began to squeeze him and ask in bewilderment what he had done with her body. The rabbit was puzzled that the child standing in front of him was so hot-tempered. He told her that she had died on the road and he had saved her by giving her a new body. Espen was in incredible shock. At that moment, it seemed to her that life had no meaning at all. Right now, tears were coming out of her eyes, and she was asking herself what kind of feeling was overcoming her right now. Did he really help her because she helped him? Lepus told her that Espen was destined to die that day. She would have died anyway if she hadn't met him. He just liked her and decided to give her a new body. However, he also added that this body is temporary and will disappear once his powers are over. Lepus asked the girl if she wanted to live on Espen, told him that she wanted to, because if she died once, she realized that she was wrong. She promised herself that from now on she wanted to cast aside all bad thoughts and live her life happily. In that case, this cute creature jumped up and told the girl that in that case they should make a contract with her. In fact, her current body was under the control of a deity of another level. One day, due to a crack between dimensions, the divine beings escaped. If she agrees to help him find all the creatures that left the time zone, then he will allow her to live on. Our heroine asked what time zone they were talking about. Lepus replied that it would be difficult to explain all the details, but they were currently in the Empire 18 years before her death. Espen screamed in confusion and asked if she had really gone back to the past. Lepus nevertheless told her that in order to save him, she threw herself under the wheels of the carriage, and he liked it. Anyway, he continued talking, saying that they should think about everything while they were walking. There was a village not far away. Espen agreed with him. Our heroine, however, could not accept the fact that she had returned to the past 18 years ago. Besides, how could she live as a child? The girl asked if Lepus could give her a more mature body, to which he replied that he had no strength at all, so it was impossible. With a heavy sigh, our heroine nevertheless set off on her journey as they had planned. But, passing through the next bushes, Espen heard a strange cry, so decided to check who was making these sounds. Soon she came across a boy. To our heroine's surprise, she noticed a child in front of her, but she did not understand what he was doing there so late. However, after taking a closer look at him, she still admitted that he was cute. If you look closely, he is a real handsome man. The only thing she didn't like was the color of his eyes, because they were exactly the same as the commander's. Somehow she assumed that even as a child, Xenok wasn't such a timid crybaby as this guy. In her mind, it was as if Xenok was the same indifferent child as he was in adulthood. This guy definitely had nothing to do with Xenok. One way or another, the girl decided to ask the boy why he was shaking so much. The guy, perplexed, asked the stranger if she was from the gang that was chasing him. Having received a surprised question about who they were talking about, the guy realized that she was definitely not one of those guys. Soon he began to cry even more. Espen, terrified, begged him to stop because she knew she had a weakness for children's crying. Starting to squeeze Lepus, she asked this half-rabbit to do at least something. However, he settled even more on Espen's head and told her that he was invisible to children. Realizing that he wouldn't help, Espen asked the boy why he was wandering around in an unknown place at such a time, being a child. After all, the forest is a dangerous place. The guy looked at the girl in bewilderment and told her that she was also a child. Our heroine asked the boy not to be cheeky, to which he apologized, and soon said that there was a child, and his gang called Pantheon, and they were bothering him. The guy said that this Pantheon is good with a sword, and he is also their teacher's favorite student, so he is valued. One way or another, the whole company mocks him, and after all the mockery, they leave him in the forest. Espen assumed that he was training with him. The guy said that it was, but only from him, because he doesn't even know how to handle a sword. Our heroine examined his wounds and crumpled clothes and assumed that those were the guys who had beaten him. The boy sobbed and said that was true. Espen immediately remembered how something similar happened in the knightly order. There were freaks who chose only objectively weak knights as opponents. Of course they didn't get off easy, because our heroine couldn't allow such freaks to feel at ease. However, the fact that she sided with the weak was also the reason why many people hated her. One way or another, whatever it was, our heroine decided to support the boy and tell him that he was not guilty of anything. Those guys clearly had problems with something. The boy then asked what he should do, to which our heroine smiled sweetly and told him that he should give them back. The guy looked away in bewilderment and said that it was simply impossible. One way or another, he was grateful to her for the advice. Espen told him that everything was fine, and then decided to ask the boy his name. As soon as the boy started saying his name, he heard the shouts of the guys calling him Snot and looking for him, asking where he was. Lepus immediately twitched his ear, telling our heroine that a fight was most likely brewing. Espen told him not to talk nonsense. She didn't understand how she could fight with such a worthless body. Also, her legs were shaking recently, and she almost fell. Lepus explained to her that this was all because she was not yet accustomed to this body. The girl did not understand what he was talking about. Just at that moment, that same gang of guys arrived, who were happy that they had finally found this weakling. Pantheon laughed, saying that he thought he had escaped, but since he was here, they would give him special treatment. Looking at the boy, he also said that their teacher had given them consent for this treatment. Our heroine was outraged by this abomination. Starting to reach for the branch, she assumed that they were novice knights, but said that 3 of them attacking one was too low. The guy, of course, turned his gaze from his target to the girl, and perplexed, asked her who she was. Espen told the boy that if he wanted to fight, he should do it one-on-one. She knows that they dream of becoming knights, but beating up a weak boy with 3 of them, of course their actions can only be called violence, and people must be held accountable for violence. She soon smiled sweetly, telling them that they were just a bunch of idiots who wouldn't be able to defeat the enemy if they fought alone. Pantheon was incredibly angry that some pathetic girl dared to scold him. Of course, without further ado, he made a dash and headed towards Espen, after which he swung his sword. Our heroine dodged without any difficulty and asked in surprise who taught the child such bad words. Shortly after Pantheon's attack, our heroine decided it was her turn to attack, so she waved her wand. A moment later, she hit the ground with it, and there was a fairly large explosion that threw the boy some distance away. After this attack, our heroine raised her head, and looking at her opponent, she told him that he was a pathetic boor. Pantheon was dejected and shocked that a little girl was attacking him, but he still instantly jumped up and told his assistants not to stand still and go on the attack. One of the guys ran up to the girl and swung his blade, but Espen dodged, and immediately after defending, went on the attack, hitting the guy in the face. Immediately after she dealt with one, she headed towards the remaining rude guy. In just a moment, all the bad boys were defeated, and Pantheon, in horror, told the girl that this was vile. Our heroine, meanwhile, appeared before this guy as a real nightmare. Soon she threw away her wand and, smiling sweetly, asked what he was even talking about. However, with tears in his eyes, the guy began to shout and tell her that she would get what she deserved. Right after these words, they started running away. Our heroine sighed heavily, thinking that such guys always have the same fate. Then she looked at her hands. She didn't understand what was wrong with this body. She hadn't learned sword skills while she was in it, but it moved so naturally. Lepus smiled and asked if she had recently asked him for something else. She should know that he had given her the best body. One way or another, our heroine decided to put aside unnecessary conversations, and turning to the boy, she asked if she was okay. He wasn't hurt, was he? The guy smiled and thanked her for saving him. She's so cool. Espen looked at him silently, while Lepus was very happy and danced on the girl's head. At that moment, the boy said that for the first time, he saw Pantheon run away from someone in fear, and none of the boys had ever managed to beat him. She was really cool in his opinion. The guy continued talking for a while about how cool she was, but our heroine decided to interrupt him. Smiling, the girl said that she was grateful to him for his kind words, but she was still hungry. In that case, the guy said he would feed her. Espen was just thinking about what the half-rabbit had told her about a village nearby. Our heroine asked the boy if he lived in the nearest village. The guy said that at the moment he did, but his house was in another place. Espen didn't understand what it was, of course, but she told him that although it might sound strange, she had nowhere to spend the night that night. The guy assumed that she had been kicked out of there too, or rather that she had run away from there. In any case, he extended his hand to her and said that she could spend the night at their house. After some time, the action moves into the house. The maid in the house, as soon as she saw the master, bowed to him and greeted him. Our heroine looked around and decided that the boy's expensive clothes did not at all match such a small house. And besides, it was strange that the servants called him master. Looking at him, she was confused. This was definitely a strange child. It felt like he was being bullied because of his status. Some time later, Espen was sitting at the table about to eat. The food was very unusual. Of course, it certainly could not compare to what was served in the dining room of the nightly order. At that moment, the boy turned to her again and thanked the girl for helping him today. Our heroine said that everything was fine, but perhaps she shouldn't have interfered. It's hard to calm these guys down in one go. Who knows, maybe after today they will start to mock him even more. However, clasping his hands, he said that it did not matter, because until now there had been no one who would stand up for him, and she was the first. Our heroine was eating, but still looked at the servant in surprise, and asked if she really wasn't doing this. The boy said that no one could support him when it came to learning how to wield a sword, and his father simply kicked him out. The boy's face immediately changed, because apparently this was not the most pleasant topic of conversation. One way or another, our heroine dared to assume that there was a reason for all this. One way or another, the girl decided to ask his name again. Knock Having heard the words poorly. Our heroine asked to repeat it again, because she had not heard. The boy smiled at her and said his name was Zinok Black Knight. Our heroine didn't even understand what she heard at first, so she continued eating, although still it was a familiar name. Finally realizing the information that had just reached her, Espen jumped up in confusion and asked again. Our heroine asked him several times, asking if his name was really Zinok Black Knight. The guy looked at her in surprise, but still said that it was true. Then the girl asked if he had any brothers or sisters. Xenoc answered that he only had a sister. Looking at this small and harmless guy, our heroine could not understand how he could be that very commander-in-chief. Was that legendary man, the envy of everyone, really like that in childhood? Our heroine immediately began to remember what he said about his teacher. Apparently, he is currently learning how to wield a sword living in this estate. The guy said that everything was correct, but unfortunately, nothing worked for him because he was afraid of the sword. Our heroine was in incredible shock, and upon hearing these words, she couldn't even put words together. As a result, the dinner ended with Espen trying to believe that it was really that same Xenoc sitting in front of her. One way or another, after some time, she was sitting in the room that was allocated to her. The girl still couldn't believe that she had returned to the past, and even to a different body. Looking out the window, she had only one question. How was she going to get back? Her head was a real mess. Remembering her past, she was certainly no less interested in the question of whether she would be able to return to her body. Our heroine suddenly thought if she went back 18 years, then that means that the real her must be somewhere. However, all her thoughts were interrupted by Lepus, who told her that it was not worth it. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Lepus yawned and said that she shouldn't think about what she was thinking about. He assumed that she was already thinking about finding her true self and changing her past. Noticing how she was clutching the blanket, he realized that he was right in his assumption, but he quickly upset her by telling her that this should not be done. Unfortunately, she was forbidden to meet her real body because they share the same soul. Our heroine asked the spirit what would happen to her if they met, to which Lepus told her that she would simply disappear. However, the rabbit did not want her to be sad, so he began to stroke her and say that if she helped him find all the deities, he would fulfill any of her wishes. With hope in her voice, the girl asked if she could really wish for anything. Lepus confidently told her that he would grant any wish. In that case, she put her arms around him and held him close. She had to do everything she could. She was in a different time now, and no one was pointing fingers at her anymore. There are also no people here who hated her in the past, which means she is free now. Our heroine suddenly thought that if she could become an even more significant person, Espen then decided that this would be the case, but first she should still fulfill Lepus's request and find all the divine beings. At this point, the girl turned to Lepus again and asked him if she could ask him a question that had been bothering her for some time. Who are the divine beings? Lepus was very happy that she finally became interested in who they were, which once again proves that she is special. Our heroine said that she simply experienced death and rebirth, so she is slowly coming to her senses. Besides, she did not plan to meet Xenoc. One way or another, at that moment, the rabbit told the girl that divine beings are animals that possess incredible power. With their power, it is possible to control a small village, an entire country, or even a dimension. Particularly dangerous creatures are in a separate dimension, and it is he who guards them. Our heroine assumed that these creatures are gods. Lepus laughed and said that in general they could think so. Their power was limited in this dimension, and they could not use it in large quantities. That's why he needs human help, and he needs to catch all the escaped animals before they do any harm. Espen, hearing this story, just nodded her head. She suddenly started cuddling the rabbit and reminded him that he told her that she shouldn't meet her real self. Our heroine was wondering what would happen if she met someone she knew in that life. Lepus told her that everything was fine, and he also reminded her that she looked completely different now. Our heroine said that she understood. Soon she fell asleep, and the action takes us to the next morning, when our heroes were standing on the street. While eating an apple, our heroine turned to Xenoc, asking if there really was some kind of training center for knights here. The guy was a little embarrassed, but still told his guest that she was thinking correctly. Well, the estate where Xenoc lives belongs to Countess Aset. She is the fiancée of Duke Black Knight. However, it turned out that Xenoc's father was weak-willed. It was only for these two reasons that the boy was sent to this estate, temporarily abandoning him. Our heroine was very interested in how the commander-in-chief was able to retain the title of Duke in such a situation. Moreover, Xenoc's personality is too different from what she remembers. The guy suddenly asked Espen if she wanted to go for a walk around the training center. Our heroine agreed. After all, if she had to catch divine animals, it certainly wouldn't hurt to look around. At that moment, they started walking, But to Espen's surprise, she noticed too many stares directed at them. Looking at the way the boy was bullied yesterday, she dared to assume that he was being bullied and hated just as much as she was. Thinking back to Espen's past, where she felt all those looks and ridicule, it was all too familiar to her. At that moment, our heroine turned around and noticed familiar guys in front of her. As a result, these little hooligans instantly turned around and started running away. Espen knew that Zinok was probably scared to come here alone, so she hugged him and told him that she was there. Soon, at the request of our heroine, they went to a quieter place to talk. Suddenly, the two of them started talking. Zinok apologized and asked Espen to tell his story first, but the girl insisted that Zinok tell his story to the end. It got to the point where Espen started talking. She sheepishly asked the boy if she could stay with him for a while. There was simply no place to stay in this village. One way or another, our heroine could not believe that of all people she had come across the commander-in-chief. At that moment, the guy even flinched from the harshness of the question, but told her that she could stay with him as long as she wanted. Our heroine was grateful to him for this. It was still good that he didn't ask where she came from and who she was. Espen suddenly smiled and introduced herself by name. After all, she had to introduce herself. Then our heroine said what she thought about those hooligans. If Zinok is left alone, he will most likely be bullied again. Most likely these guys will take revenge on him for the fact that she beat them. So since he allowed her to live with him, she will help him. The guy asked again in bewilderment, to which our heroine smiled and said that he could ask for anything. And again, for some unknown reason, tears appeared in Zenok's eyes. Our heroine, seeing them, of course screamed in bewilderment and asked why he was crying. The guy sighed heavily and lowered his gaze, and soon said that no one had ever helped him. And immediately, Espen remembered the words of the people from the knightly order. Our commander is cool, but he is too cold. Sometimes it seemed to them that he was not interested in anything at all, etc. Despite all this, she also remembered her times when she was practicing at the training camp. Literally, every time Commander-in-Chief Zinok would pass by and praise Espen for what she was doing so well. The commander also said that if she needed help, she could contact him. Even though hatred for the commander was growing in her at that moment, those words were etched into his memory for a long time. Then, the entire knightly order was her enemy, with the exception of one single friend. At this moment, our heroine stroked Zinok on the head and asked him to stop crying. She instantly turned back, unsure if she had just patted the commander-in-chief on the head, and yet the feeling was too unclear. Deciding to change the topic, Espen said that apparently this is the training center. Should she also enroll here? Zinok asked again in surprise, and our heroine nodded and said that she also wanted to study the art of swordsmanship. Zinok blushed very deeply at this point. In any case, our heroine understood that the closer she was to him, the easier it would be for her to protect him. She was very curious about why Zinok in his youth was not good with a sword, because it was very strange. The future commander-in-chief of the knightly order could not handle a sword. Of course, the first thing that came to Espen's mind was that someone or something had influenced this. Our heroine suddenly asked him if he was coming here against his will. The guy started to turn his head. The boy explained that the truth was that his father told him to go to this center, and he was just staying here. Espen told him that she understood him and soon asked if he wanted to go for a walk in the village. She still needed to collect those divine Pokemon. Zinok asked again, and our heroine told him that they didn't have to hang around here. If he wasn't in the center, there shouldn't be any problems. And once again, our heroine felt painfully familiar. Feelings that followed her from the shadow of the past. Anyway, she said that there are no people dear to him in this place, so he must meet a person who will love and appreciate him. Of course, the girl didn't really want to get close to him, but despite the fact that he helped her, she wants to repay him. Remembering the picture from the past, our heroine even clutched her heart. Zinok asked in confusion what happened, to which the girl said that everything was fine. Just as they were about to get up from the bench, Lepus jumped up in bewilderment and began calling the man. The rabbit screamed in terror without stopping and said that they had an emergency. Our heroine, perplexed, asked him what had happened, to which Lepus replied that he had felt something. The girl asked if he was really talking about. Lepus interrupted her and said that it was true. He had sensed a divine being. Soon he began jumping to one side, saying that they should follow that way. Of course, our heroine immediately turned to Zinok, pointing in one direction, and asking what was in that direction. The boy said in surprise that there was a village in that direction, which meant that the first animal was in the village. The girl immediately stood up from her seat, saying that she was heading there. Would he go with her? Zinok lowered his head and told our heroine that he had to meet with the teacher today. Espen assumed he wanted her to go to training with him. However, the guy said that the teacher does not meet with strangers. He is very famous and people even come to him from far away. However, he said that he would ask the teacher if he could stay away from the center for a while. Soon the guy raised his eyes and told our heroine that he would like to be next to her. Our heroine was undoubtedly very surprised by these words, so she hesitated a little. Meanwhile, the guy looked at her with puppy eyes and asked if it was really impossible. Espen was shocked by this manipulation and wondered if this was really her future commander. However, at this point, the guy started to cry again, saying that he shouldn't have said that, so he asks for forgiveness. With every word Zenok said, our heroine was more and more shocked, and all the information did not fit in her head. He suddenly asked if he was a burden to her. Espen asked him not to talk nonsense, and patted his head, and said that everything was fine. Without noticing it, she patted his head again. In any case, the girl said that she was just thinking about other things, so he shouldn't pay attention to it. Anyway, the girl headed towards the village, saying that she would take a walk, and they would see each other at dinner. Zenok said goodbye to our heroine. At this time, Pantheon and his gang, sitting in the bushes, finally waited for that very right moment. In turn, the action takes us to a time when Espen finally came to the village. The girl asked where they needed to go. After thinking for a moment, he turned around and pointed in one direction, saying that they should go there. However, the strange thing was that there was nothing there. Our heroine didn't understand anything at all because she had no information about these creatures. She wondered if there was another way to find them, or if she should just explain it in a way she would understand. Lepus sighed heavily and said that where a divine being appears, the manifestation of his power is felt. The rabbit said that people call such phenomena a miracle. Our heroine was very surprised. Just shortly after Lepus' words, a snowflake landed on our heroine's hand. The girl immediately assumed that this was the very divine power. But why was it so strange? Meanwhile, a villager said in a tired voice that it was snowing again. Apparently, he was not at all surprised. Our heroine decided to approach him, so turning to him, she asked in surprise if snow was really a common occurrence here. The man smiled and assumed that the girl was not from around here. Espen smiled and said that she was. A villager said that this phenomenon was surprising, but recently this has been happening quite often in the village. Literally out of the blue, it starts snowing in the middle of the day, but no one knows why. Even the capital's magicians came here to see it, but they didn't notice anything strange. He admitted that it was unusual, but still the snow did not pose any danger, so they, the villagers, simply enjoyed this phenomenon. At this point, the man suggested our heroine to try something interesting. He suggested she taste one of the snowflakes. Having decided to obey, our heroine ate the snowflake, but soon said that it was completely tasteless. The man said that everything was correct. Snow usually doesn't have any taste, but some say it's slightly sweet. This is the first snow this year. One way or another, the villager said that this snow is not dangerous at all, so there is nothing bad about it. At this point, Beria was approached and called to come over, to which the man said that he was already on his way. Next, Lepus approached our heroine and told her that it was undoubtedly Snowweaver. This is a divine creature that creates snow. The snow itself changes depending on his mood. Since the Snowweaver is the first creature she has met, it won't be easy. Our heroine asks what makes it special. Lepus explained that if Weaver was in a good mood, the snow would taste sweet, but when he was in a bad mood, it would taste salty. Weaver, by the way, doesn't like Lepus, so it will be difficult to catch him. However, our heroine told him that everything will be fine because they have no choice. She had a rough idea of what the creature was, so they would try to catch it. She suddenly asked if there was anything Weaver and other creatures might not like. Lepus suddenly said that there are divine animals that like human food, but he doesn't know what Snowweaver likes. Anyway, at that moment, the rabbit started pointing towards the alley, saying that he felt his presence there. Our heroine looked at the alley and closed her eyes. Lepus asked if she was scared too, which the girl replied that she didn't like the dark. Unfortunately, it reminded her of being a victim of a fire as a child. Either way, Espen had no choice but to head into the dark alley, so she started walking. At that moment, our heroine noticed two adults standing near the child. The boys turned to the little boy and said that they only needed money, so as soon as he gave it to them, they would not touch him. The boy, however, was not a weakling, so he immediately told his uncles that they would regret coming here. Soon, several bright flashes were heard from the alley, accompanied by screams. The boy stood over the fallen men and smiled sweetly at them, but still the men were not going to give up. He had just jumped up from the ground when he immediately fell down. Soon a girl came up and told him that during a fight, he shouldn't forget to look under his feet. She said this because the enemy could knock him down at any moment. The guy looked at the stranger in surprise and thanked her for her help. Espen decided to skip the greetings, so she asked who he was. The guy smiled at her and said that he was a magician, and his name was Cade, and he was pleased to meet a stranger. Our heroine looked at him in surprise because she was certainly not ready to meet a magician, that is, a person who controls magic. The heavenly knightly order she belonged to was a place for knights and mages. Among her many sword comrades, there was also one sorceress. With the exception of the mages who joined the heavenly knightly order, most of the wizards lived in the magic tower. One way or another, at this moment, for some unknown reason, Cade was very surprised. The guy, without thinking twice, went to his new acquaintance to talk to her. Coming closer, he asked the girl if she was okay, and he hoped that he hadn't hurt her with the magical blast. Espen told him that everything was fine. It was just that she was seeing a magician for the first time, so she was a little confused. The boy smiled at her and soon assumed that she lived in this village. He was curious about her name. The girl was silent for a while and soon said that her name was Espen. The boy smiled widely at her again and said that, as he had told her earlier, his name was Cade. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, not understanding why there was a strange feeling inside. Why was his name so familiar to her? There was a feeling that she had already heard about him somewhere. One way or another, she suddenly decided to ask the boy if he was too young to be a magician. Ignoring the girl's question, Cade raised his wand and told Espen that she was too young to handle the branch so deftly. Our heroine smiled at him and said that it was because she was a knight. Then she suggested that Cade lived here too. The guy, however, said that this was not so, because he was simply following his teacher, a great magician. At that very moment, a bolt of lightning seemed to run through Espen's body. To her horror, our heroine discovered that she had remembered that name after all. Cade is the same great hermit magician who existed in her past. When she became vice commander, the emperor was struck down by an unknown disease. The only thing that could heal the ruler was the magic of the great wizard. Just at that moment, the great magician Cade appeared in the empire, healed the emperor, and immediately disappeared. Of course, His Highness ordered the knights to find the great magician, but he in turn seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Espen remembered how hard they had been searching for the mage, so she couldn't understand how she had forgotten it. In any case, our heroine realized that in the future, this guy would become a great magician, so an awkward thought immediately popped into her head that she should become friends with him. While Cade was busy getting rid of the trash, our heroine decided to ask him why they came to this village. The boy said that they came here because they heard that some miraculous phenomenon was happening here. He and the teacher were collecting some special treasures. Our heroine asked in surprise if they were really looking for treasure, but then she was interested in what kind of treasure they were talking about. For example, Cade named a harp that creates waves, a stone that makes food very tasty if you just put it in your food, and a time turner. The guy said that this thing is very valuable for their search, because with its help, they can go to the future. Espen screamed in confusion in her head, and Cade at that moment summed up again that they arrived here because it started snowing in this village. Just at that very moment, Lepus screamed at the top of his lungs and told our heroine that they had another emergency. At that moment, the snow weaver appeared, so our heroine jumped up and fenced off Cade. Our heroine thought that something great and terrifying would stand before her. But a child? Lepus asked the girl not to be afraid, because he was the one they needed. Espen asked in bewilderment if this little one was really a divine creature. Our heroine did not understand why Lepus looks like an animal, and in turn, Weaver looks like a human. It was as if they were different species. One way or another, Lepus didn't have time to say anything because there was no time for talking, because Weaver started running away. Our heroine, of course, ran after him. But at that moment, Cade turned to the girl in bewilderment. Espen apologized guiltily and said that it was time for her to run. She also asked him how much longer he would stay in the village. Cade said that he thought they would be here for a while. In that case, Espen grabbed his hand and said that they would see each other again. She still really wanted to ask Cade about the treasure, but right now the most important thing was to catch the Snow Weaver. In turn, Cade thought in surprise, assuming that Espen knew that kid. In any case, he couldn't understand why the girl was running around with some strange animal on her head. Should he follow her? Meanwhile, our heroine finally stopped after a long run. Unfortunately, they missed him. Deciding to push the bad thoughts aside, she told herself that Weaver was somewhere in the village anyway, so she just needed to find and catch him. At this time, as it was not difficult to guess, Weaver was hiding and watching the pursuer. There was rage in his eyes. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the training center, where as always, Pantheon and his assistants were bullying Xenok. Looking at the guy, the hooligans asked him in surprise if he would at least try to take a sword and try to parry the blow. Pantheon soon said that he couldn't do that, because that idiot wasn't around, so today he was going to break his legs. Xenok was incredibly scared, and what he wanted most right now was to go home and not have to feel all of this. He wanted a different outcome for himself. He immediately remembered the past in which they looked at him and asked how such a thing could have happened. What was the point of having such a powerful force? Yet these memories were like fuel for him, driving him to change. So at that very moment, the boy grabbed the sword. Pantheon laughed at him and asked what he was going to do with the sword now. Instantly, he brought the blade to Xenok's neck and told him to at least try to hit him. With great difficulty, Xenok was able to get back on his feet, even though they were weak. In turn, Pantheon and his gang began to just burst into loud laughter, insulting Xenok. Once again, the guy returned to the past. Once again, the hooligans threw the boy onto his back and started kicking him, despite the fact that he was screaming. The action moves to the guy's past, which was quite dark. In a room with several corpses, the guy was sitting on all fours and holding back his vomit. A certain man rubbed his hands in surprise, saying that Xenok was the only one who managed to endure all of this. The Duke, however, looked at him with disdain, saying that this piece of weakling could not even pick up a sword. Once again, the action shifts to Pantheon and his friends, who have finally stopped because they got bored. In turn, Xenok lay on the ground, beaten, and in front of him, he only saw a sword which was like a ray of light for him. Despite everything, he began to reach for the sword with his last strength. Meanwhile, Pantheon and the others were actively talking about something and laughing at the same time. Just at that very moment, the unthinkable happened, because Xenok jumped up from the ground, and with a dash, he cut a piece of Pantheon's clothing. But fortunately for them, they managed to dodge. The boy looked up in bewilderment and was horrified to discover Xenok's terrifying gaze. Pantheon didn't understand what had happened at all, because this idiot couldn't even pick up a sword. The guy immediately fell to his knees, thinking that at this rate he could be killed. He soon came to his senses and was horrified to discover that everything was fine, and Xenok was still lying on the ground. A shudder ran through Pantheon's body. Apparently, he had only imagined it. In any case, he ordered his assistants to finish off this freak. Once again, the action takes us to our heroine, who was exploring the village and trying to find Weaver. She asked Lepus if he knew where Weaver was. The rabbit reminded Espen again that the Snow Weaver doesn't like him, which is why he's hiding. Our heroine put her hands on her hips in surprise and said that she wondered why Weaver didn't like him. Lepus immediately remembered the past in which they had fought with him too often, even saying that they hated each other. In any case, he decided not to show it, so he just said in surprise that he himself did not know. Our heroine began to squeeze him once again, asking if he really didn't care at all about these divine animals. Having not received anything sensible, the girl said that they realized that one of the creatures was in the village, which meant that all that was left was to catch it, and now it was time to go back. The girl also then looked at her only weapon, which was a branch. She understood that this branch would definitely not suit her, so she needed a real weapon. It would be great to have the sword she had in the past, but with this body, it's unlikely that anything will work. Again, she sighed heavily, but reminded herself that it was time for her to return home. After some time, she finally came to the training center, but she was shocked almost immediately. Of course, she was shocked by the fact that, once again, Xenok was lying on the ground, without the ability to even move. Our heroine ran up to him and began trying to bring him to his senses to find out what had happened. Turning back, she noticed 3 small freaks, who upon noticing Espen immediately began to run away. Espen started to get furious, so she almost ran after them. But at that moment, a trembling hand grabbed her. Zinok looked at her with tears in his eyes and said how he wanted to become stronger. Our heroine, looking at this desire, only bit her lip hard. The commander will become the strongest knight. Zinok will be considered the greatest man in history. He will become the worst nightmare for enemies. But where did this talent come from? Our heroine understood that it could not simply disappear. Looking at the broken Zinok, the girl understood that his skills were embedded somewhere inside this body. But should she help him? Coming a little closer to Zinok, our heroine asked a logical question. Why does he want to become stronger? Our heroine, of course, assumed that he wanted to beat up those hooligans and thus take revenge. Looking at Zinok, he just nodded his head guiltily and continued wiping away his tears. Espen nevertheless asked him to stop crying because she would help him. Yet our heroine understood that he would become strong even if she did not intervene. She will simply think that this boy and the commander she knows are different people. Besides, she certainly had nothing in common with the commander-in-chief, so she decided to help. Meanwhile, the action moves to adult Zinok. The guy hit the table and ordered to find Lady Espen and bring her here. He ordered all the knights to search simply because he did not give her permission. The guy also added that Lady Espen has no place to go, so they have to find her. And again, the action takes us to Espion. Our heroine turned to Zinok and told him that she would help him because he did the same for her. She had no food, no home, and he took her in so she will help him become stronger, which means that from tomorrow he does not have to go to the training center. Our heroine explained these words by saying that from that moment on, he would be studying with her. She promised to help him, but he would have to look for something with her. Anyway, she suggested they continue the conversation over dinner. After a while, they were sitting at the table. Zinok was looking forward to dinner, and our heroine suddenly said that she was looking for a child. The guy certainly didn't expect to hear this, so he asked again. Our heroine immediately caught herself thinking about how cute he was, but immediately dismissed these thoughts because this boy sitting in front of her is the commander-in-chief. She sighed heavily and came to her senses. Soon she smiled sweetly and told him that he had heard correctly. She was looking for a child. Espen began to describe him, saying that the child had white curly hair, was wearing shorts, and had small horns on his head. Zinok, hearing the words about the horns, was undoubtedly very surprised. In any case, Espen decided that the guy would understand everything when he saw it. Meanwhile, Zinok was intently drawing something. Espen didn't understand what he was doing, when suddenly the guy said that everything was ready. He immediately held out his drawing to Espen, asking if the child looked like him. Our heroine took the drawing in her hands and was very touched by how funny and cute this drawing was at the same time. Espen, however, immediately said that she thought Zinok should not be drawn anymore. After a pause, the guy even got upset. However, our heroine immediately continued to say that he should stop drawing simply because he would become the best knight in the empire. Then, our heroine decided to ask why he lived in this small house all alone. Why not move to his father's property, which he left to him? The guy looked away and said that it was too cold and unbearably gloomy in that place. Our heroine told him that he can tell her anything he wants without even being embarrassed. She will soon disappear from his life anyway. The guy raised his gaze and became a little sad, but soon lowered it again and sighed heavily. Zinok began to cry, saying that he had been abused in the same way in this estate. Every time he thought how long he would have to live being so weak, it always seemed to him that he would grow up worthless and become a useless person who no one needed. Our heroine immediately assumed that Zinok wanted to take revenge, not only on those idiots. She understood that if she helped him now, he would not feel true gratitude towards her. But this little boy gave her shelter and food, and she can pay for that. This man will become a brilliant commander, even though he looks like this now. Espen decided not to talk about such sad things, so she suggested that they eat and have some fun. Zinok looked at her in confusion and asked, "What about the training?" Espen told him that they don't have to do it. The guy started to try to say something in surprise, but our heroine interrupted him, saying that he would not become strong in just one day. That's why the same applies to rest. Nothing will change if he rests even for a day. The action, meanwhile, takes us to a dark alley where the snowy weaver was very angry. He began to replay in his mind the moment he saw Lepus sitting on a man's head. The guy simply did not understand why he was with a person at that time. What was the reason? One way or another, he decided that he would not leave it that easily. The action takes us back to our heroine, who at that moment was just waking up early in the morning. Before she could even fully wake up, the girl heard a loud crack, so she turned around at the loud sounds. Coming out into the corridor, our heroine noticed a maid lying on the ground who was looking guiltily at Espen. Without even saying a word, she raised her hand and pointed towards the window. Of course, our heroine did not wait for any answers, so she headed to the window to look at everything herself. To her horror, the girl discovered that the entire village had been covered in snow overnight. Our heroine went outside after a while, but she didn't understand what was going on. It was all real snow. The villagers were perplexed and asked what was going on. The man said he himself could not believe that so much snow had fallen. Anyway, he said that the Lord was already alarmed. The mages will arrive soon, so we need to wait. While our heroine was looking at the fallen snow in surprise, Lepus approached her and said that all this was the work of the snow weavers. He decided to remind that the divine animal that creates snow can change this same snow depending on its mood. Our heroine understood that if Weaver was in a good mood, the snow would taste sweet, and if he was in a bad mood, it would taste salty. The girl decided to try the snowflakes, but she immediately turned red. Her tongue seemed to be completely burned. It was incredibly spicy and bitter at the same time, and there was a sour aftertaste. Lepus jumped on Espen, assuming it was a bit spicy. Weaver isn't one to get angry often, but the sour taste means he's very sad. Our heroine was surprised by what she heard. Why is Weaver sad? It was strange because Weaver was very capricious. Right now he was probably pouring slop on Lepus, but why was he doing that? Espen didn't think about the reasons for his actions. In any case, the girl decided that it was time to act, so turning to Zinok, she told him that it was time to move out. Just at that moment, the girl started running and telling Zinok that there was a lot here, so he had to be careful. At that very moment, she slipped. Luckily for Espen, the guy managed to react in time, so he grabbed her hand and began to stare into her eyes. Our heroine admitted that he was quite strong, but at that moment, Zenok's face changed. The guy, confused, put Espen on her feet and soon ran away from her for some distance. Espen, however, despite the guy's embarrassment, was surprised that Zenok managed to pick her up as if nothing had happened. This is the only reason our heroine assumed that Zenok had good physical skills from birth. That's why the conclusion was that he only had problems with swordsmanship. Our heroine began to look around anyway and noticed that most of the residents were depressed. One of the farmers spoke in horror about the end of the current harvest. Looking at an apple covered in ice, he asked how people would eat it. Only because of this, our heroine realized how much harm the snow weaver has done to those around her. This snow is very dangerous for the village. Still, the girl couldn't believe that a divine animal was capable of this. In any case, something had to be done. The girl immediately turned to Lepus and asked him if he could make it so that other people could see him. Lepus snorted, saying that he could do it because nothing was impossible for him. But why would he need it? Espen asked him to show himself to Zenok. Still, she was confused by the fact that she seemed to be talking to herself, and even more so, she was going to take Zenok with her. Lepus, perplexed, said that he didn't want to, but our heroine immediately began to squeeze him, asking if he really didn't want to and couldn't. Still with grief in half, but he resigned himself. At that very moment, the divine being used manifestation magic and revealed itself to Zenok. As soon as Lepus appeared, the boy looked at it in confusion and asked what it was. He immediately came closer to touch this thing when suddenly Lepus bit his finger. Espen reminded him that she needed to find someone a child, and this child was exactly what he needed. She introduced him as Lepus and asked him not to be afraid because he was not dangerous. At that moment, the divine animal looked at Zenok and told him that he was obsessed with many things. The boy looked at the rabbit in confusion and asked what he was talking about, to which Lepus told him that he didn't seem to know anything, but that was even better. Our heroine told him that he would now go with them, so she would tell everything as it is. Lepus is a divine creature like the boy they are looking for. Sometime later, our heroine finally finished her story. Fortunately, Zenok understood everything and believed Espen's words. Espen was glad that he didn't have any doubts, despite the fact that everything sounded crazy. The image of Zenok looking into Espen's eyes was a little different in her eyes. She hoped he would be okay. And again, our heroine began to think that the commander-in-chief was standing in front of her, so she began to ask herself to forget about it. And yet she still couldn't believe that these two seemingly different people were actually the same person. At this time, Xenok was closely watched by Lepus, who made sure that the guy really did have a lot of things that he was obsessed with. Also looking at our heroine, he understood that she still did not know about his character, but still he would prefer not to interfere. They seemed pretty sweet and happy now, but still ignorance can sometimes be a good thing. After a while, they began asking the villagers about the boy with white hair. One of the men said he had never seen anyone like him. They told each other that the boy had long ears. The man even said that he did not believe that such people exist. Our heroine, in this case, understood that their investigation would not lead very far because everything seemed problematic. Just at that very moment, a loud scream was heard behind them, to which the boys, of course, turned around. The man screamed in horror and said that he fell because of some boy who had snow-white hair and some strange ears. Espen and Zinok immediately looked at each other. There was no doubt this was definitely a snow weaver. The man kept talking about how this guy was wearing shorts, which was strange in such weather. In any case, he was interrupted by our heroine, who looked at him in bewilderment and asked where he had seen this boy. Meanwhile, the action takes us to Weaver, who was standing on the roof and watching his creation. Meanwhile, the happy girl and her mother were making a snowman out of the snow, of which there was already too much. The girl told her mother that their snowman was as big as her dad's. The girl's mother suggested that she make another one, to which she agreed. Weaver looked at them and wondered, "Parents?" He didn't have any, so he asked them not to misunderstand him. At that very moment, out of some unknown hatred, he sent several ice spears towards the mother and child. Soon the ice spears touched the ground, and as a result, a broken snowman now lay on the ground. Fortunately, at that moment, our heroine came to the aid of the mother and her daughter and managed to save them. Our heroine put them on the ground, and having calmed the girl and her mother sent them away from here. However, at this point, the snow weaver had finally spotted Lepus, so it was time to act. Once again, he began to throw a whole bunch of ice spears towards our heroine, who fought off the fragments with only one stick. In any case, despite the weapon, our heroine wondered, will she be able to use her sword skills? Meanwhile, a whole bunch of ice fragments flew towards Xenok, who literally froze in bewilderment in front of the danger. Luckily, Espen came to his aid, waving her stick and reflecting all the shards. The block came out very well, but unfortunately for our heroine's wand, it was the last straw because the wand broke into two parts. Our heroine immediately wondered what to do when suddenly, at that moment, Xenok shouted and pointed to the blacksmith's table, on which there were various weapons. Noticing a good sword, our heroine instantly made a dash to take it, but at that very moment, Weaver's attack began again behind her. However, she easily reflected all this, and Lepus happily began to talk about how, as expected, he made the right decision in choosing this person. Both Snowweaver and Xenok were confused by the girl's skills, so they didn't understand who she was and why she was so strong. In any case, the divine creature was about to attack our heroine once again, but at that moment, Xenok blocked her. At that very moment, our heroine screamed and asked Xenok to grab the barrel and throw it. The guy, without really thinking about it, grabbed the barrel and threw it straight at Weaver. As a result, he received a pretty good blow to the head, which even left him in a stupor. However, following Xenok's attack, our heroine also went on the attack, intending to deliver a crushing blow in a jump. As soon as she hit Weaver with all her might, she landed on the ground and wondered only one thing: did it work? Soon, the dust from the impact cleared, and our heroine noticed a strange creature on the ground. What is it? Where did the boy go? Our heroine approached him in bewilderment, and taking him by the tail, began to tug at him to see if he was alive. After some time realizing that there were no signs that he would come to his senses anytime soon, the guys decided to knit a snow weaver. Soon the eyes of the divine creature began to open little by little, and the first thing he noticed was the puzzled look of the two children. He immediately began to twitch and scream in bewilderment, asking who they were anyway. Once again, our heroine asked why Weaver was in such a guise, since he had just been a human. Lepus explained that when divine beings experience shock, they revert to their true forms. Our heroine asked why Lepus was in the form of a bun. The animal screamed in confusion and said that this body was definitely not a bun. However, all this time, Weaver was watching them, and he was too angry, Suddenly, our heroine raised her head, and to her surprise, noticed snow. Moreover, there was too much of it. Lepus turned to Weaver and asked him not to waste his power simply because he might disappear. The animal, perplexed, began to laugh and ask whether he would disappear or not. What difference did it make to them? Once again, he turned into his human form and looked at the people around him, and not only with anger in his eyes. At that very moment, he looked intently at our heroine, and using unknown magic, he scratched her cheek. Right after our heroine, he was about to take on Xenoc, so he turned towards him. To his horror, he discovered that this boy was far from what he pretended to be. Weaver was both surprised and scared by this. Either way, he jumped up and ran towards Easpin, pushing her to the ground. So after he knocked the girl to the ground, he just walked forward. Our heroine, who was lying on the ground, and Xenoc, who was trying to grab her, fell after her, asked the guy if he was okay. At that moment, the guy hung right over her and looked into her eyes in bewilderment. The guy instantly turned incredibly red, because he definitely didn't want to attack Espen like that. Our heroine, in turn, decided to change the topic of conversation, suggesting that this child had run away again. Xenoc sighed and said that it was. Anyway, Espen smiled and patted his head, thanking him for helping her, and that he was a great guy. Again, these words were incredibly important to Xenoc, because he had never heard them before. In any case, it was impossible to lie on the ground for long, so getting up from the ground, he offered his hand to Espen and raised her. At the moment when our heroine was talking to Lapus, Xenoc came up to her and sat on her knee. The guy grabbed her by the dress and asked her if he was useless. Our heroine was at first very surprised by this question, but then she smiled, looking at him. The girl told him not to talk nonsense, because he tried very hard, and she was proud of him. The longer she looked at him, the more the image of the commander-in-chief was erased from her memory. At this point, Espen noticed that Xenoc was crying, so she asked him in confusion what was wrong. The guy told her that he felt better. Looking at Xenoc's sincere smile, our heroine decided that he really didn't seem as bad to her as in the past, because now he was her friend whom she met here. Meanwhile, Lepus was watching the guys who were chatting so nicely, and with a heavy sigh, he said again that this guy was obsessed, which meant she would regret it. In any case, at this rate, a week passed. The village was still covered in snow. The guys seeing one of the houses even suggested that it might collapse due to the amount of snow lying on it. The snow continued to fall, and it grew heavier each time. After the culprit of all this ran away, they never saw him again. Espen, of course, assumed that he was hiding somewhere, but it would be difficult to find him. Despite the climate change, local residents still managed to adapt, but this did not apply to everyone. Most of them were panicking, asking when the mages would arrive. They hoped that real mages would arrive, not the ones from last time. They couldn't wait for this damn snow to stop. Espen generally understood why they were so upset. However, if the royal knights come to the village, then the situation will become much more serious. From her experience, she says that these people do not forgive those who harm people. Our heroine turned to Lepus, asking him if he really didn't know why the snow weaver was acting like that. The rabbit just shook his head, saying that he didn't know. Espen asked him to be serious because it was important. However, he only landed on Espen's head and settled down more comfortably. Our heroine couldn't understand whether this dumpling with legs was really going to behave like this until the very end. Anyway, at this point, Lepus said that divine animals have no concept of family. However, Weaver really wanted to be human-like so he could have a family. That is why he got himself a human form and moved to the village. However, our heroine was still interested in why exactly Weaver hated Lepus. The divine being explained that he wanted and decided to take Weaver in and make him his ward. Lepus assumed that this was the parent's concept. Espen, perplexed, shouted at him and said that it was not so. At that point, Lepus sighed and said that he too did not know what a parent was. Espen told him that she understood, but he still had to understand that when the royal knights arrived here, they would capture the snow weaver. After stroking Lepus, she told him that she did not know how divine animals could be accepted in this world. After all, the worst-case scenario is that Weaver could be experimented on or killed outright. Our heroine took Lepus in her hands, and looking at him, asked if he was okay. However, in response, she saw only the ever-smiling and sweet face of the animal. Espen sighed in disappointment, as she had absolutely no idea what he was thinking. In any case, she decided it was time to go. After some time among the crowd of people, our heroine noticed Xenok, who was sitting on the fountain. Our heroine asked how long he waited for her, because she was gone for a long time. The guy smiled and said that everything was fine. They decided to split up and find the divine animal to save time. Unfortunately, neither he nor Espen were able to find it. Xenok apologized to Espen in disappointment. Our heroine told him that everything was fine because she had also been looking for him for a whole week and hadn't found even a trace. The girl continued to smile and look at him, telling him that he had tried hard. Soon she turned her gaze to Xenok's sword, which was usually in the holster. He himself admitted to her that it was difficult for him to hold the sword in his hands. Nevertheless, our heroine turned to him and said that very soon he would be able to adapt to it. By the way, our heroine said that it was high time to start the long-awaited training. Xenok was only happy about it. Espen looked at him and thought how cute he was. And again, she began to bring herself to her senses by reminding herself that this was the commander-in-chief. She should look at him differently. But still, this boy standing in front of her is just Xenok. Soon they decided to approach the woman. And to their luck, she said that she saw some child in one of the alleys. Without thinking twice, our heroes began to run with all their might towards the alley indicated by the woman. Literally, a moment later, they finally found this guy they had been looking for so long. Without thinking twice, our heroine made a dash and ran to suddenly attack Weaver. But unfortunately for Espen, he managed to react. Shortly after her attack, our heroine screamed in confusion as a surprised Cade stood right in front of her. However, our heroine noticed him too late, so the sword swing is inevitable. Now they will collide. Anyway, at that moment, the guy waved his cane and apologized to Espen. A moment later, our heroine soared into the air, which certainly surprised her. Soon the guy smiled and looked at the girl and asked if he remembered correctly that her name was Espen. Our heroine, still in the same bewilderment, sank to the ground and, not understanding what was happening, nodded her head. After some time, she came to her senses, so she asked for forgiveness in horror. She confused him with another person. Cade laughed and said that everything was fine, so she didn't have to apologize so much. And yet Espen continued to stand her ground and ask for forgiveness, because she didn't think she would meet him. Cade suddenly decided to ask what actually happened. Why was she suddenly attacking people? Our heroine laughed and said that they were actually looking for someone. She explained that they were looking for a boy about his age, which is why she got them confused. Cade smiled and said that it was dark in the alleys, so it was quite possible. After that, he decided to ask who was standing next to her. Our heroine happily said that this is her friend and his name is Zenek. He is helping her. Cade greeted Zenok, who in turn stood behind Espen in surprise. The girl laughed and asked to understand him. She explained that he was a bit shy. However, Cade saw something that she did not see, so he was very surprised by her words. Deciding not to attach any importance to it, he said that he did not know why they were looking for that man, but he still decided to offer them help. Espen decided that it would be good to get help from the great mage in the future. However, she suddenly simply thanked him for offering to help. Unfortunately, she understood that he might have too many questions that she would not give him answers to. That's why she said she didn't want to seem impudent, but she asked to keep everything a secret, and if it became difficult, then he might not help. The guy, of course, was surprised by this, but still said that he would fulfill her request and would be like a fish. It immediately seemed to him that something interesting was happening. Espen sighed and asked if he had heard of divine animals. The boy said that he knew that these were beings who came from other dimensions. He heard from the teacher that the world is divided into different dimensions, and they are intricately intertwined with each other. Also, sometimes creatures appear from intersections, and it also happens that people move in time. Our heroine immediately decided that she couldn't let it show, so she said in bewilderment that she now understood what it was. Cade added that even many magicians don't know the concept of divine animals, so it's surprising that she knows something about them. Our heroine smiled and said that she just... At that moment, she was interrupted by a scream coming from the square. They turned around in confusion. Some voices were shouting and saying that they had found the suspect. Espen assumed that this was what they needed, so she suggested that the boys follow the screams. After a while, they came to the corner and started to look out from behind it. They immediately noticed some kind of commotion. Looking around, they noticed the knights. But where the hell were they going? Espen wondered. Did they find out that the snowfall was caused by a snow weaver? Apparently, because he attacked people, a report was filed, which means that trouble is coming. Our heroine turned to the boys and suggested that they follow the knights. Maybe what they were looking for would be there. At this point, Xenoc, perplexed, told Espen that the knights had split up in different directions. What should they do? In that case, the girl said that most likely they would also have to split up. Cade said that in that case, he would go alone. If the one they were looking for was not with him, he could immediately rush to them. He also said that he would cast a tracking spell on them, and if Weaver was in his possession, he would send a signal. By the way, he decided to ask who they were looking for. Espen was not a talkative person, so she said only one sentence. They are looking for a child with horns. Cade said he understood. If he happens to have it, he will launch firecrackers into the sky using magic. The action takes us to the knights, who were confused about how they had missed it. The second knight asked if they had checked everything. At this point, our heroine asked Xenoc if he was okay. The guy, perplexed, said that everything was fine, but the knights seemed to have missed the snow weaver. In that case, the guy still decided to ask in surprise what they should do now. Espen assumed that apparently the knights were indeed looking for the same thing they were looking for, which meant that the snow weaver was not far away. It would be nice if Lepus tried to sense Weaver's presence, but this little lamb avoids him. Suddenly, our heroine raised her head and noticed Weaver. It was a great stroke of luck. The guy, meanwhile, was looking around the corner, thinking about these annoying people. He used a lot of strength to get rid of his own traces. However, at that very moment, he heard a rustling sound behind him and immediately turned around in horror. Our heroine stood in front of him, grinning very hard as she looked at him. And so he was found. Of course, the first thing Weaver decided to do was try to escape, but Espen immediately told him that he would not leave so easily. The girl did a somersault, and in a moment, she found herself in front of him. Our heroine smiled, and looking at Weaver, told him that, as she had said earlier, he could not hide from her. The guy understood that he should under no circumstances fall into the hands of this girl. In just a moment, it turned into a huge ice floe that hung in the air. Espen knew it was a real disaster, because if the ice floe fell, those people might notice it. No doubt the knights would come here in that case. Eventually, these people will capture the snow weaver. The guy, meanwhile, was not in a very positive mood, so he told our heroine that if she did not leave, he would kill her. Espen sighed heavily, realizing that she had no choice. She couldn't make too much noise, so she would have to eliminate him silently. However, she only has one chance. At that very moment, our heroine flew past the ice floe and made one precise swing of her sword. A moment later, she pulled him out, telling him that he had certainly been distracted for nothing. Knocking him to the ground, she raised her blade and pointed it at him. However, Weaver was not about to give up. Our heroine, looking at him, did not really understand what was happening to him, because for some reason he began to get angry. Weaver suddenly said that he would destroy her because he was tired of enduring this. Espen asked him why he hated her so much. Weaver asked if she was asking that because she really didn't know. However, at that moment, Xenoc called out to Espen saying that the knights were already on their way here. Our heroine understood that things were bad for them, and the situation was definitely getting out of control. At that very moment, Cade appeared above them, finally able to find them. The guy smiled and asked if they needed help. Our heroine screamed that they absolutely needed it. Meanwhile, the knights had just arrived at the scene of the incident they had been told about, but there was no one there. However, one of them said that he definitely heard a noise coming from here. They must have imagined it, so they decided to check elsewhere. Cade smiled again and said that everything was ready. She wanted them not to be discovered as far as he understood. Right? Espen asked the mage if the people outside the barrier wouldn't hear them. The guy said that was true. In that case, she took out her blade because she could use her power to the fullest extent with peace of mind. Cade immediately realized in confusion that this was a swordmaster who possessed unusual strength for her age, or maybe she was some kind of genius. After some time, Weaver was once again captured and tied with a rope. Before the battle, Espen looked much more depressed than she did now. It had been so long since she last stretched her body like this. In any case, she immediately approached Xenoc and asked if he was hurt. The guy said that everything was fine. Cade thought about it. If he thought about it, Espen had simply managed to catch this overly active divine beast. Some time ago, Xenoc approached Cade, pointing to the canopy, and asking if breaking the canopy would pacify the lamb. Cade suggested that it might work. In that case, the guy turned to the magician and asked him to help because it seemed that only he would be able to get there. After a moment, Zenock finally pulled out his sword and made a quick swing. At this rate, the lamb was finally caught, which made him incredibly angry. Only thanks to this, our heroine soon hung over him, smiling slyly, and saying that it was all over. After some time, Zenock looked at his hands in bewilderment, realizing that he had managed to strike with the sword, even though its capabilities were hidden. Until now, it seemed to him that people who wielded a sword were cruel and callous. However, thanks to Espen, he realized that swordsmanship could be truly beautiful. Looking at her, he thought that he wanted to become like her. Our heroine approached him again, asking if he was okay. Did he feel any pain? The guy turned around and, in bewilderment, began to talk about how he had struck with the sword, and only thanks to her. He was not afraid at all. She is the best. Hearing these words, our heroine was perplexed, because on the one hand it was pleasant, but on the other, she went back in time again, remembering how the commander-in-chief told her that she was the best, and that she could be proud of herself because she was his only deputy. Espen still couldn't understand why the memories she had forgotten kept popping up in her head again. At this point, Cade turned to the boys and suggested that they leave first before talking. Yet he understood, as did the others, that this place would be filled with knights. The very next day, Weaver was still screaming, saying that he had nothing to talk about with people. The cute-looking lamb even started screaming and telling them all to die, so our heroine covered Zenock's ears. After that, Espen asked the guy if he had prepared everything. Zenock looked at her and nodded his head. Soon he took out a large feather, and approaching Weaver, he began to tickle him vigorously. The animal began to burst into laughter and tell the man to get lost. In turn, our heroine looked too menacing in appearance. She told Zenock to make sure that Weaver would not even think about escaping. After that, she wondered what she should do. She was asked to gather the divine animals, but not to hold some horned boy hostage. If this lamb escaped again, she would have more trouble, and Lepus still hadn't said what to do with it. The girl picked him up and said that she felt like she wouldn't be able to catch Weaver if he escaped again, so he should do something about him. The situation is much more dangerous because the townspeople asked the king's knights for help. She asked him if he wanted to collect all the divine animals. Lapis nodded. Espen then asked him to promise to be honest with her and answer everything she asked. He wouldn't stalk her forever, would he? Lepus nodded again. Our heroine was very glad that he still understood her, so she hugged him. After a while, the girl approached the boisterous Weaver, who was muttering incessantly about something. Seeing Espen, the guy started screaming again and asking to finish him off. Otherwise, he would run away again. Our heroine looked at him in bewilderment and asked if he really didn't mind if they killed him. The guy asked again, in confusion. Espen told him that in that case, she would ask Lepus if she could kill Weaver. Weaver narrowed his eyes, certain that Lepus would give the go-ahead. However, at that very moment, a puzzled Lepus appeared and said that he would not allow the Snow Weaver to be killed. Our heroine looked at Lepus in confusion and asked, what if Weaver escaped again? The divine animal said that in that case, he would have to be caught again. Weaver couldn't believe his ears, so he asked, a little puzzled, if Lepus didn't hate him. Our heroine looked at him and asked if he really hated him. Lepus said that was nonsense, and he never hated him. Espen then suggested giving Weaver to the royal knights. After all, if he ran away again, they could catch him and make shashlik out of him. Lepus, however, said that this would not work, because Weaver had to return home alive. Weaver didn't understand what was happening. He even had the feeling that Lepus was thinking about him. Our heroine approached the prisoner and said that although she had not known this pig rabbit for very long, but still, as she began to squeeze him, she said that she felt like he really cared about him. Soon after these words, for some unknown reason, Weaver turned into an animal and rushed into Espen's arms. Our heroine certainly didn't really understand what was going on, but she still hugged him back and asked him to stop crying. At that moment, Cade approached them, clapped and congratulated them on the truce. Once the problem was solved, the magician asked if he could ask this strange rabbit something. The action moves forward a week. From that moment on, it no longer snowed. The weather recovered and everything became fine. And our heroine finally began training Zenock in the art of swordsmanship. We are just transported to one of the trainings. Our heroine told Zenock to hold on for another 10 minutes. Since the boy was afraid of swords, The training began with him simply getting used to the weapon. She suddenly wondered how he had managed to break the canopy a week ago. Anyway, she put that thought aside for now. She turned to Xenoc and told him he could rest. Weaver, perplexed, turned to the person, namely Espen, and said that she was a great teacher. By the way, he has been living with them since the moment of capture. The maid's sister received the new lodger in a very strange way. She was very glad that their master had another friend. At this point, Weaver said that this guy is weak. The guy, perplexed, began to refute this and say that this is nonsense because he is not weak. At this time, our heroine was watching them, but nevertheless, her thoughts were still occupied with something else. Before this, Cade asked her if this rabbit really told her to catch the divine animal. He also suggested that this was the reason she stayed at Zenok's house. Our heroine said that she simply had no place to sleep. Cade suddenly looked at her in surprise and asked if she would like to come to the dorm where he was staying. He could help her find other creatures if there were any nearby. He also said that his teacher would be able to help her from time to time. Espen understood that Cade's teacher was the one who would make the boy a great magician. Still, it was really not bad and looked like very good conditions, but at this point, Zenok intervened. The guy, perplexed, began to tell the girl to stay and live with him. He grabbed our heroine by the hand and asked if she could stay next to him. Espen blushed incredibly from all this. The main thing for her was to control herself and not forget that the commander-in-chief was standing in front of her. The girl laughed and told Cade that she wouldn't be able to move into the dorm. The magician then said that they would see each other next time. She herself understood that this was right, because she had to teach Zenok in exchange for him allowing her to live with him. By the way, she suddenly wondered where the next divine animal was. Meanwhile, a certain creature standing in front of the gate began to sense the smell of Snowweaver coming from there. The next day, our heroine asked Cade in bewilderment if the magician would really arrive here. The guy said that the Lord himself personally sent the request, because it looks like, due to the snow situation, he will come to the city to investigate. Our heroine was at a loss. She didn't know what to do or what to do now, because a magician from the Heavenly Knightly Order would arrive here. Cade walked up to her and patted her on the shoulder, asking her not to worry so much. If he fails to find the divine lamb, the situation will soon calm down. At that moment, Weaver took out an ice cube, telling the man that if this magician even tried to offend her, he would immediately give him an ice cube. At that very moment, the guys suddenly fell silent. Weaver himself suddenly said that he wasn't particularly sure that he would succeed. Weavy. This is now the nickname of the Snow Weaver, and they came up with it to call him more affectionately. As soon as this little one moved in with them, she asked if he knew anything about other divine animals, but in response, he only shook his head. It turns out that he hadn't even seen other animals, but it would be good for her to know at least something. After thinking for a bit, the guy said that as soon as he woke up in this world, there were 3 of them. Our heroine asked him again in surprise, to which he said that he clearly remembered the green meadow on which they lay. One of them ran away, saying that he wanted to see lightning, but the second one really wanted to find flowers. Weavy smiled and said that he was the only one left in the city because he felt it. Our heroine immediately realized that the divine animals had scattered in all directions, which meant that they needed to look outside the city. How difficult! The action moves to the palace. The man asks in surprise if the Duke's son has returned yet. The butler said that it had been a long time since he had last been seen here. He also added that the teacher who works with Zenok said that he had not seen the boy for a long time. Lord Aset was incredibly unhappy about this, so he said outright that it was very bad. Duke Black Knight's offspring is a stupid boy, and he was told to look after him. Moreover, the man even said that if he succeeded in making a warrior out of his son, he would generously reward him. Aset even hired a teacher who asked for a lot of money in order to teach Zenok. He immediately ordered the boy and the teacher to be called. The butler asked again in surprise. The man said that he had to take control of the situation, otherwise nothing would work out. Meanwhile, Cade returned to his place, but Zenok began to train hard. The boy soon stood up and asked Espen in surprise, who taught her the art of swordsmanship. Our heroine smiled and told him that she was born talented. The guy looked at her with admiration, saying that it was cool. Espen calmed him down anyway and said that it was just a joke. When she was little, she had a teacher who was a retired knight of the Heavenly Order. Still, if you think about it, he is still an active knight at the present time. She also said that, to be honest, she improved her skills a lot. Where she was and studied, there was a man whom she considered a genius. She always tried hard to become better all the time, but that genius was too smart and capable and always stood in her way. If you think about it, despite everything, she really respected him. Xenok, listening to her story, was very surprised. The guy did not take his eyes off Espen. Taking a step towards her, he asked the question that interested him most. Did she like him? Just thinking about the commander-in-chief, our heroine began to laugh and asked Xenok not to talk nonsense. Wiping away her tears, she said that she didn't like that man at all. Moreover, she even told him that she hated him so much that Xenok couldn't even imagine. At that very moment, a memory popped into her head of Xenok asking her in the morning if she had slept well. Our heroine blushed like a tomato, just remembering this, and she couldn't hide it. The guy looked at Espen in bewilderment and asked what happened. Our heroine, almost with tears in her eyes, told him that everything was fine. Then she asked him to continue training and not be distracted by anything but. At that very moment, the boys heard a rustling sound behind them, which made them turn around. In front of them, they noticed the same young freaks who had bullied Xenok. Espen glared at them and asked if they were now going to follow the victim home. Instantly, she swung her sword and placed the blade right next to Pantheon's neck. One of the boys, nevertheless, asked her to calm down, because they came here to convey the teacher's message. Our heroine asked again, and Pantheon said that she heard everything correctly. Looking at Xenok, the guy said that the teacher was looking for him. Espen immediately remembered how the guy said that this man came from far away, and he was also a famous knight. But still, she knew that Teacher Xenok was definitely not the type to talk. In any case, the situation looked too unusual, so it was necessary to think about what to do. Espen still put away her sword and asked how she could believe that they were telling the truth. After all, she decided to remind them that they were mocking Xenok. One of them started shouting and saying that they weren't lying, but Pantheon immediately shut him up. The guy at that moment said that although he was still studying, he considered himself a knight, and it was not typical for them to lie. He had an order to pass on a message. He also looked at Xenok and said that if he didn't show up, he would be in trouble. Isn't that right? Our heroine still looked at them with a degree of skepticism because she didn't want to trust them. Anyway, Xenok petted her and told her not to worry. He'd be right back. The boy also said that he would inform the teacher that he would no longer attend the center. Looking at the surprised Espen, he said that he wanted her to teach him. Soon, Xenok headed towards Pantheon, but our heroine did not understand for a long time what it was. One way or another, the guys left our heroine hoped that everything would be fine with him. Immediately, the expression on Xenok's face popped into her head, which always made her feel sorry for him, so jumping up from the stump, the girl decided that she had to go after him. After some time, she was watching the training camp from the bushes. Espen wondered if she could slip inside, or if she could do it quietly. Lapis suddenly asked Espen if she wanted to hide her presence. Our heroine, perplexed, said that she wanted to Lapis, then said that he would help her with this. Our heroine, however, did not understand what he was talking about, so she asked him, and Lepus replied that he could make her invisible. Espen was puzzled and asked why he was only talking about this now. Lepus admitted that he was too lazy. Espen told him to stop talking and get down to business. In a moment, everything was ready. Espen watched the squad and assumed that following Xenok was a good idea. However, after examining the entire area, our heroine was horrified to discover that Xenok's teacher was standing right now and scolding his student. Our heroine, watching this nightmare, could only remember her past. Likewise, near the teacher, Espen noticed another man standing nearby. It seems that this is Lord Eseta. Count Eset, although he was subordinate to Duke Black Knight, had absolutely no influence or power. At this point, the teacher asked in surprise if Xenok was really going to leave. He had only said that he had decided to just take a rest. The teacher told him that he could not hope to train on his own. The Count also told him that at this rate he would be constantly beaten. Now our heroine finally understood the whole problem. The commander-in-chief was all alone all this time. Lepus decided to ask the girl what she ultimately decided to do. "Do you need help?" Espen said that she couldn't just watch this happen, so she should go and get Xenok Lapus, asked how she would do that. Looking down, she said he was right, because she couldn't do anything in this body. She had no money, no status. Still, she thought about it. It would be enough for her to become an adult. Lepus asked if the problem was really in the body. The divine animal said that if she really needed to become an adult, then he could fulfill her request. But for a while, Lepus said she could consider it a bonus for being able to catch the snow weaver. The teacher continued to scold Xenoc. The boy, in turn, was thinking about what to do. How should he act, and would he be able to escape from here? The Lord suddenly said that he hoped that Xenoc understood him perfectly. From tomorrow onwards, he was obliged to come to the center every day, and there should be no more objections. However, at that moment, our heroine came out being in an adult body and said that if he had no objections, then she did. Xenoc, of course, recognized Espen in the woman's face, but he didn't understand what this was all about. Lord Aset was no less surprised, so looking at the girl, he asked who she was. Our heroine told him that she was the young master's guardian. Aseta immediately assumed that, judging by her manner of speech and appearance, she was clearly an aristocrat. Could it be that the Duke had sent her? It was also at this point that the girl said that she was Xenoc's swordsmanship teacher. Espen smiled, looking into the Lord's eyes, and told him that she was still much better at teaching. The teacher shouted in confusion and asked how he could trust a person he was seeing. For the first time, Espen said that if he didn't believe he could attack her, with incredible confidence in her eyes, our heroine told him that he could attack her to see the difference between them. The guy immediately noticed that she looked strong. He wouldn't be able to do anything to her, and in that case, the Count simply wouldn't pay him. Realizing that there would be no confrontation, our heroine took Xenoc and led him along. The guy asked in surprise if it was Espen. The girl said that she would tell him everything later. Suddenly, the teacher turned to her and told her to wait. If she really was teaching the young master, then he had to show the results of his training. The teacher pointed at Pantheon and said that if Xenoc could defeat his student, then he would accept defeat. Without a drop of doubt, our heroine said that she agreed, but they should know that they will not be able to go back on their words. The teacher then looked at the Count and asked his lordship if he agreed. Looking at Espen's sly smile, he said that he was sealing this deal in the Lord's name. The loser would have to submit to the winner's terms. After a while, the guy was sitting in tears and panic. Lepus asked in confusion what had happened. Our heroine told him that he should be left alone for now. The guy held out well, but fell apart as soon as they got home. Looking at him, she wondered if everything would be okay. She hoped so. Just at that moment, Cade flew to Espen. The girl greeted him and asked if he could just fly here. The guy said that there were no people in the area, so there was nothing to worry about. Then the guy looked around in surprise and asked, "What happened? Why is there such a gloomy atmosphere here?" Our heroine sighed heavily and said in response to this that there was a reason for this. Espen approached the guy shortly after and asked him if he really thought he couldn't handle it. Xenoc turned around and asked her what if he couldn't win. Would she leave him? Our heroine sat down next to him and asked why he thought so. Until he mastered the sword perfectly, she was not going to part with him because he was her first student. In that case, Xenoc said, hand on heart, that he will not cry anymore. He really wants to win. Although Espen supported him, she suddenly thought that Xenoc still hadn't overcome his fear of the sword. At this time, Cade, who was still standing there, was watching them closely. The action moves back some time. The guy, as he loved before, stood on the roof and watched Espen. At that moment, she was little, and for some reason, she was watching someone from behind the bushes. Shortly after, there was a small flash that caused the girl to instantly become an adult. Looking back, he knew for sure that it was the use of magic, but he didn't understand how she managed to do it, since she wasn't even a mage. He also had questions about this divine animal that was always nearby. Too many questions and no answers at all. Her main question was just who she really was. Should he tell his teacher? He immediately decided that this was a bad idea, because in this case, there was a high probability that she would be captured and taken to the magic tower. At that moment, a question pulled him out of his thoughts. The guys were asking Cade what he thought. He asked if he remembered correctly that they said that nothing would come of fear. Our heroine said that everything was correct. The guy immediately thought about this question. Thus, the action takes us a month later. Namely, on the day of the duel, Pantheon has been training with his teacher all this time. The boy laughed, thinking that they thought that this brat could reach his level in just a month. It was impossible. Pantheon suddenly turned around and asked the teacher if he was sure of his victory. The man nodded his head without a doubt. However, the teacher told him that he must be extremely careful. After some time, they were already standing in the ring, which meant that the duel was about to take place. Espen looked at Teacher Pantheon, telling him that they must have been preparing seriously. One way or another, the Lord interrupted her and reminded her that, as promised, the loser agrees to any demands of the winner. At that very moment, as soon as the participants in the battle stood on either side, the judge waved his hand and announced the beginning of the battle. Xenoc was focused on the battle and determined to win. He stood there and simultaneously remembered what Espen had told him. The girl looking at the tired Xenoc said that he had enough skills. She also told him that he was good with a sword. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to destroy all the dummies they had. In any case, Espen herself understood that a month is not enough for a person to completely overcome their fear, but she had a plan. She would just change the environment, and Cade would help her with that. On the day of the duel, he had to make it so that Xenoc would not see what was happening, but would mentally be in another place. It is in this other reality that Xenoc will only be shown what he likes. Of course, the guy started thinking about flowers, fields, clear skies, and also only Espen popped into his head. If he focuses on the things he likes, all his fears should evaporate. At this point, Pantheon screamed in confusion and asked his opponent why the hell he was smiling. The guy couldn't stand it, so at that very moment, he made a dash towards Xenoc and attacked him, but their blades touched. Pantheon assumed that the brat had been training, which surprised him greatly. But why was he so bold? At that moment, Xenoc looked at his opponent and asked him in surprise if he had always been this weak. Due to such an unexpected question, Pantheon even stumbled back and lost his balance, giving Xenoc an opportunity to attack. In just a moment, Pantheon's sword flew into the air and soon landed just like the sword's owner, who fell to the ground and looked at Xenoc in bewilderment. The guy looked into his opponent's eyes and soon told him that he really couldn't show anything special. The boys began to shout and talk in confusion about Xenoc's victory, while the Lord was confused. Smiling anyway, he decided that he could now calmly inform the Duke that his son was making progress. While Lord Aseta was happily looking at Xenoc, a puzzled and now former teacher of Xenoc approached him. The man raised his head and looked at him with a cold gaze and told him that he was fired. Right after the battle ended, Xenoc was incredibly happy and excited, so he ran towards Espen. The action moves forward 18 years. The building of the Heavenly Knights. The knight sat down on the chair, saying that it would not take long to die like this, and all because of the worthless vice commander. The other guy agreed with him. They all wondered when the commanders-in-chief would stop doing God knows what. Of all of them, only the sorceress remained silent, silently listening to their nonsense. The knight suddenly asked if they had heard that the commander-in-chief had managed to catch a first-degree criminal. Since when had the commander mastered the sword so flawlessly? The guys assumed that he had been good with a sword since childhood, if not since birth. The guy was confused that no one knew the answer to this question. At that moment, one of the guys said that he had heard something, because there were rumors. The Duke, the commander-in-chief's father, sent him alone to Mount Paraket, teeming with monsters to convince him of his son's genius, and from that moment on, he became an outstanding swordsman. The knight was shocked that the Duke had sent his son, despite the fact that he could have died. If anyone had to die, he wanted the vice commander to die. The magician, who continued to silently listen to all this nonsense, could not restrain herself. Chloe wondered where Espen had gone, as everyone around her was going crazy and everything was getting weird. Meanwhile, the action moves to our heroes. At that time, Xenoc still left the training center, and the former teacher was thrown out of his job. Our heroine assumed that he was probably still in shock, because it turned out that the teacher lied about his career. The fact that he was a knight from another country was also a lie. The teacher was bullied and soon began to live as a hermit and wander around the village. However, everything was fine once everything calmed down, and this made Espen very happy. But what just jumped into the bush? Noticing this once again, Xenoc was incredibly angry. Espen calmed him down, saying that she would talk to him herself. Our heroine approached the bushes, and looking at Pantheon, asked why he was always hanging around their house. Had he forgotten that they were not on the best of terms? The guy was just confused and angrily asking where that night girl was. Espen asked if they were talking about her sister. Pantheon asked what she was talking about. Our heroine said that she and her sister even had similar hair colors. Anyway, she asked him why he needed her. The boy turned his head away in embarrassment and said that he also wanted to study. Espen immediately told him that he wouldn't be able to do it, so after making the verdict, she asked him to leave. If he doesn't disappear from her sight this very minute, then she will help him get out of here. The guy, of course, had heard about her skills, so he decided not to argue with her too much and immediately ran away. The action takes us to Cade, who was told that magicians from the Heavenly Knightly Order would arrive tomorrow. Cade's teacher said that they were probably already very close, so they might even arrive earlier. Of course, the guy passed this information on to Espen, which the girl was incredibly surprised about. Are they really going to come? Cade laughed and said that they would most likely come. Espen decided that what Weavy had done was not going to be left alone. By the way, will someone our heroine know arrive? Although there are hardly any of her acquaintances among the current members of the Heavenly Knightly Order, at this time, Lord Aset was greeting the guests who had just arrived with a smile on his face. These guests were, of course, the gentlemen magicians. The dark-haired guy was Maseth, who was the 6th member of the Heavenly Knightly Order. The guy said that he came here to investigate the incident by order of His Majesty. He asked in surprise if the anomaly had occurred in this place or in another. The Lord told them that everything was so, but nothing strange happened anymore. Maseth replied that it didn't matter, because their job was to investigate. He also added that climate change requires a huge amount of magic, so everything needs to be studied. Lord Aset told them that he understood them, so they could feel at home. To himself, he thought that it was quite awkward. At that moment, he called the servant, but the boy accidentally fell to the ground. The Lord apologized, saying that his servant was too clumsy. Maseth smiled coldly and said that everything was fine, but he did not think that he was worthy of serving the members of the Heavenly Knightly Order. At that very moment, the Lord fell silent, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, Maseth's assistant noticed something strange behind him. Looking back, he noticed a cute creature running around the flowers and admiring them. Cleary looked at the creature in confusion and wondered, what is it? At that moment, this animal approached the magicians and even accidentally stepped on their feet. After this, the divine animal smiled sweetly and told the man that he smelled delicious. Cleary took it in his hands in surprise and began to examine it closely. However, at that very moment, Maseth snatched the animal from his comrade's hands, asking what it was. Despite the animal's pleas to let him go, the man smiled madly and said that there was still something interesting in this area for him to explore. Meanwhile, the action takes us to our heroine, who cried out in bewilderment, saying what she remembered. The mages of the Heavenly Knightly Order, who were currently in action, were familiar to her because one of these mages was Chloe's father. In turn, Chloe is a mage of the Heavenly Knightly Order, being in 10th place. She was Espen's only friend. Our heroine remembers how the girl told us that her father was in the order, and she studied hard to be like him. Chloe smiled and said that they even looked almost identical. Meanwhile, Lepus and Weavy were fooling around with each other, when suddenly Lepus smelled something. He immediately turned to our heroine and said that a new divine animal had appeared in the town. The rabbit said that he didn't notice him because the guy was hiding his presence. Weavy, as soon as he heard the words that the divine animal was hiding itself, assumed that it was Flea. Our heroine asked them in bewilderment who she was. Weavy and Lepus looked at each other. Weavy immediately began to say, upset that she liked people. Lepus, however, said that she liked flowers more. Our heroine asked again what they were talking about. Weavy decided to explain to her. He said that he was a divine animal, able to control Snowflea, in turn, deals with flowers and plants. Their abilities are related to the environment, and if there are flowers and plants near her, then her strength will increase. Then the guy talked about her character, which was interesting. Our heroine was intrigued, so she decided to ask what was wrong with him. Weavy said that the short version is that it's best never to make her angry. Meanwhile, Cleary asked Mr. Maseth if he knew what it was. According to the code of the mages, they cannot touch creatures or objects without knowing their essence. Maseth smiled nonetheless and told Cleary not to think too much. He asked him to calm down as he understood everything. Firstly, they certainly shouldn't have worried about the risks. Secondly, since the creature was captured, it hadn't been violent once, but the man even said that he knew what it was. It was a divine animal, which was written about in their textbooks. Cleary said in surprise that he seemed to have heard something about them. But was Mr. Maseth really sure that this was a divine animal? The man asked Cleary if he remembered why they were called to this area. An abnormal climatic phenomenon. A lot of snow fell here, and this was in the summer. According to the scriptures, divine animals influence nature and climate, but they arrived here without suspecting that the anomalies were connected with them. Still, he asked to look at this creature, saying that they had living proof in their hands. Putting his hand on Cleary's shoulder, Mr. Mazeth told him that they had made a great discovery, or rather, would make one. He asked them to just imagine how much magical power was hidden inside this creature. They would make history when they gutted this little beast. Maseth also asked not to forget that he is higher than Cleary in the hierarchy, so he reminds that he does not like it when he is contradicted. As soon as Maseth left, Cleary could only think about how greedy the bastard was. The basic ethical code of a mage is to not harm life that you see for the first time. At that very moment, the man heard footsteps behind him, so he turned around and asked who it was. As soon as Cleary turned around, he noticed Reuben, who was the junior apprentice of the magician Maseth, standing behind him. The man asked what happened. The boy said the teacher asked him to cover the cage. Cleary looked at the blanket and asked if it was that Reuben said he thought the animal might freeze. Cleary sighed, saying that his students were too different from himself. Reuben asked Sir Cleary what he was talking about, to which the man replied that he was thinking out loud. Stroking the boy on the head, he said that he was looking at him and remembering his little daughter. In any case, he pointed to the cage and advised him to cover it and leave immediately. Shortly after, Mr. Cleary headed for the exit, leaving Reuben alone. At that moment, the guy thought that Mr. Cleary was a very good person, who, unlike his teacher, did not hurt him. He even decided that it would be good to study magic with Mr. Cleary. He immediately came to his senses, because it was impossible to desecrate the honor of his teacher. The guy soon took the blanket and went to the cage to cover the animal. At that moment, the animal looked at the guy and said that it was very nice of him. Reuben even threw the blanket out of his hands. The guy asked in bewilderment if she was really talking. However, at that moment, the divine animal looked at the boy and said that he smelled like grass. Soon after, she turned into a human and told the boy that she liked kind people like him. Smiling, she looked at the boy and asked him if he could help her. The guy screamed in bewilderment, and Flea in turn flew up to him and poked him in the nose. He instantly turned red as a tomato, which Flea noticed and told him about it. The guy, although stuttering, was able to ask this divine creature who she was. The girl smiled and told him that her name was Flea, and she was looking for her friends. She immediately asked him if he had seen any creatures like her. The guy said he hadn't, because he had only just arrived in the town. Flea immediately realized he was a stranger. In any case, Flea continued to smile sweetly and ask if a kind person would help her find her friends. The guy just wanted to say something, when suddenly at that moment, he heard a creaking door. Reuben turned around and was horrified that the teacher had decided to return so soon. The guy started telling the girl that he agreed, but before that, he asked her to return to her previous form. Reuben told her that if the teacher saw that she had taken on human form, he could immediately begin experimenting on her. Flea decided not to argue with the man, so in a moment, she turned into a cute and fluffy animal. Soon the girl turned to Reuben and thanked the man for agreeing to help her. The action takes us to our heroes, Espen and Xenoc, went out into the field and looked into the forest. Our heroine soon said that this was the very place of their first meeting. They had not been here for a long time. Meanwhile, Weavy was telling Espen that Flea really likes trees and flowers. There was a very high probability that she was in a place with a lot of plants. However, at that moment, Lepus spoke to them and said that he had stopped feeling Flea again. All he knew was that she was somewhere on this planet. Xenoc suddenly suggested that they search in this forest. What if she is in it? Weavy agreed, saying that it is quite possible. Soon they set off into the forest. Espen was glad they were on the trail, but where the hell were they going to find the divine animal? Incidentally, at that moment, she looked at Xenoc in surprise and wondered, had he always been so tall? In any case, the girl asked him to search in those areas. In turn, she told Weavy and Lepus to go in the other direction. After a while, everyone was busy trying to find Flea in any place they could hide. Xenoc would never have thought that together where he met Espen, they would be looking for the divine animal together. The guy at that moment approached her and asked if she had a last name. Espen asked him again in surprise. The girl immediately remembered the past in which she still lived in the estate with her family before everything that happened. The girl said that only aristocrats have status, and accordingly, a surname, and she is a commoner. Her answer upset him a little, but he still approached her and asked her in surprise how she felt about a wedding between commoners and aristocrats. Espen, of course, was a little surprised by such an abrupt question, but said that if a couple likes each other, then she does not see a problem. But why did he suddenly ask her about it? One way or another, having heard the answer from Espen, the guy was incredibly happy, and at that moment his eyes even sparkled. The action, meanwhile, takes us to Weavy and Lepus, who is talking about how she doesn't understand hints at all. Anyway, at that moment, Zenok told Espen that he wanted to know about her homeland. The girl asked why so suddenly. The guy looked away, saying that he still didn't really know anything about her, so he would like to get to know her more. Espen knew she had to give some kind of answer to his question, but it was still difficult to do so. Moments from her past in which she lay defenseless on the ground began to appear before her eyes again. While she couldn't do anything, her estate, or rather her parents' estate, was simply burning to the ground. Returning from these terrible memories, the girl said that her relatives were very far from here. Anyway, she decided to change the subject, saying that she felt like the divine animal wasn't there, so it was time to go back. Having already set off back, our heroine thought that they would most likely need Cade's help. The action moves to the city where the guys finally met. Looking at Weavy, the girl asked if they had found anything, maybe some clues. Weavy just shook his head. Espen assumed then that Flea wasn't in the forest at all, or maybe very deep in it. Weavy suddenly asked the man what was for dinner tonight. However, at that moment, shouts began to be heard in front of them. Someone was shouting and saying that it would be better to help them think. The man, by the way, did not particularly notice what was happening in front of him, so he crashed into Espen simply because he did not notice her. The man, perplexed, grabbed the girl and prevented her from falling, and then apologized and asked if she was okay. Our heroine, as soon as she opened her eyes, noticed a man in front of her who looked very much like Chloe. Cleary, meanwhile, asked Espen if she was hurt. In any case, he is a mage with healing magic. At that moment, the man raised his wand and used magic on Espen. A few seconds later, he asked the unknown girl if she was feeling better. Espen was still confused, but she was still able to say that she was feeling better. Cleary was very happy to hear this, but still apologized again. He was in a hurry anyway, so he wouldn't look after her at all. Turning his head back, he told her that if she had any pain again, she could come to the Lord's castle, and his name was Cleary. Finally, he stroked her head, telling her that she was cute and that his daughter was about the same age. After that he left, but at the same time he continued waving his hand for a long time. Zenok looked at Espen in surprise, thinking that this was the first time he saw her like this. Despite our heroine being depressed, Weavy approached her with a very important question. He asked the man where they would eat. Zenok still decided to ask what happened to, which the girl said that everything was fine. He just met a person she knew. Without thinking twice, she suggested that he follow this mage. Zenok wasn't particularly against it. Weavy, confused, began to scream and remind people about food. Our heroine asked him to be patient a little, and soon they would return home to eat. Meanwhile, our heroine still followed the two magicians, and strangely enough, they came to the Lord's castle. Also looking at Cleary and the man standing next to her, she noticed their robes, which undoubtedly indicated that they were royal mages. However, our heroine thought correctly, since this magician whom she met is indeed Chloe's father. However, reminiscing about the past, Chloe told Espen that her dad died when she was a child. He went to work and never came back. Our heroine realized with horror that she had now encountered one of the terrifying moments for a time traveler. Right now, she met a man who was dead in her past. She immediately wondered, was the incident that happened here the cause of Chloe's father's death? In any case, she said it was time to go back. Our heroes immediately headed home, but Lepus, for some unknown reason, thoughtfully watched the palace. They eventually returned home and told Cade about meeting the royal mages, which surprised him. Soon the guy said that if these magicians were located in the Lord's castle, then everything was clear. Our heroine asked him again in surprise. Cade explained that right now there was a very powerful energy coming from the palace, which he felt. Usually, mages who come on business are housed in ordinary houses, but this time everything was different. The guy immediately said that he was sure that something or someone was being hidden in the Lord's castle. Espen immediately decided to guess who it was. Cade nodded his head and said that everything was right. The divine animal could be located right there. Lepus joined the conversation and said that he also felt something from the castle. Our heroine, of course, immediately began to squeeze him and ask in bewilderment why he had remained silent until now. The rabbit said that he was not completely sure. Just being captured by Flea's people, she could have asked him for help, but she did not do this, although she definitely felt his presence, so he did not say anything. Our heroine immediately jumped up and slammed the table, saying that this wouldn't work. They would go to the castle tomorrow to see for themselves. She looked at Cade and asked if he would help them. The guy smiled and said that if she wanted to investigate, he was all for it because it would be fun. However, right after that, he said that they had a problem because there were two royal magicians and they lived in different places. He and the teacher greeted them. That's why he thinks they'll need to explore both places, but it'll be impossible to do it in just one day. The two mages' homes are a long distance apart, and he also noticed that the protective barrier was getting stronger in the lab. But that was normal around mages' homes. Our heroine immediately asked, what if they split into groups and each explored their own territory? Cade said that sounded good, but how to communicate? Espen said that if Lepus was at a distance, she would know what he was doing, so Lepus, Weavy, and Xenok would go together. In turn, our heroine will go with Cade, and they will search in the castle, and the three of them must explore the dwelling of the magicians. Xenok was very depressed, because he really wanted to go to the castle with Espen. Our heroine at this point approached him and asked if he remembered the magician they had seen today. She wanted them to follow him. Taking her hand, Xenok said that he would fulfill her request, but asked her not to get too close to Cade because he wanted her to be friends only with him. Espen sometimes still didn't understand what he was talking about. Anyway, she agreed with surprise and told him that he was the closest to her. And yet, for some reason unknown to her, she blushed deeply without even understanding why. Xenok smiled because he was glad that Espen also wanted to be friends with him. At this point, Cade intervened in their conversation and said that this was too much because he would also like to be friends with Espen. At that moment, an awkward pause appeared between them. While Cade smiled, Xenok followed him with his terrifying gaze. Our heroine, in turn, turned her head from side to side in bewilderment and did not understand what this gloomy atmosphere was. Leaving aside this strange incident, the action still takes us to the next day, when our heroine was already ready to go to the castle. She looked at Cade and told him that she had hopes for him. The guy smiled at her and said that everything would be fine. The girl then looked at the group that Xenok was in. She asked Lepus and Weavy not to screw up too much. Immediately after all the orders were given, our heroine, with the help of magic, made a high jump and flew over the fence. After some time, Espen and Cade were in the building and trying not to give themselves away. Xenok, Weavy, and Lepus walked around the castle just as carefully. Cade at this point told our heroine that there was no mage in the second team, so he wanted to know if everything would be okay. Espen said that Lepus was with them. This rabbit promised to help her. She angrily began to tell him that they had work to do to find the divine animal, so he should join. At that moment, Lord Aseta appeared on the horizon, and in bewilderment, he began to say that all magicians were gloomy. His servant tried to calm his master down, saying that the mages were on the residence's territory. The man said that they would not be here today, so he could say whatever he wanted. These mages asked for the entire laboratory building, and also the best room in the castle, so he had to give up his. Damn royal mages. After that, he asked the servant if there was any news from the Black Knights. Espen was incredibly shocked to hear this. The servant said that there was no news. After some time, they came to a certain place. Our heroine dared to assume that this place was the laboratory. Without thinking twice, she suggested going there, so they immediately headed there, but suddenly, Espen stopped Cade, saying that there was a magical barrier here that couldn't be easily passed through. He explained that as soon as they entered the barrier zone, an alarm would go off. He could do something, but Espen would have to remain under invisibility magic for now. At that very moment, our heroine heard someone's voices nearby, so she decided to listen. The aristocrats said that it was difficult with the mages, and that they hoped that they would leave soon. They also noticed that at night, the cries of animals could be heard from the laboratory. At that moment, Espen and Cade were in the closet as the aristocrats walked past. As soon as the voices became barely audible, our heroine assumed that they had passed. The girl asked Cade if he could use his magic here. However, raising her head, she noticed Cade standing close to her. Looking at his amber eyes in bewilderment, the girl said that they were very beautiful. The guy smiled and said that he was pleased, but nevertheless, she was also beautiful. In a moment, they were heading towards the lab. Cade told Espen that the more they entered, the stronger the barrier. The invisibility magic could dissipate. Our heroine, however, was not going there just like that. So she turned around and said that she had an idea. A couple of minutes later, she was standing there in the guise of a maid. If there is a risk of being caught, it is better to appear in this guise, and then they will be able to get out of it. In turn, Cade turned into a stately aristocrat who still looked very handsome. The guy immediately asked the girl how she liked the result. He was able to create an image that he had ever seen, so he chose the image of his father. In turn, she immediately understood about herself that this is how he saw her during the battle with Xenok, when Lepus made her an adult. However, at that moment, the guy said that, in fact, it was not the first time he saw her in such a guise. He had already watched her from the sky, and she was very interesting to him. Looking at Espen, the man with the power, he asked where she came from. Why was she looking for the divine animals? Who was she? After touching her curls, the guy said that he wanted to know absolutely everything about her. Meanwhile, the action moves to the laboratory, where Reuben was looking after Flea, who really wanted to look at the flowers, so she wanted to go out. The guy looking at her immediately thought about it. Each such question from her put him into a stupor. He didn't know what to do because his teacher wasn't there, but he in turn said that he would leave for a while. Perhaps there was a connection between them. Will everything be okay? The guy decided to say that he could take her to the garden. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to take her outside the castle. Flea was happy that they could go for a walk, so she instantly turned into a human and said that it was time to have fun. After a while, they were in the garden. Reuben was watching Flea, who in turn was enjoying the green meadow. Soon the girl began to create flowers around and scatter them in different directions. Reuben was now confused and delighted, so he immediately asked if it was Magic Flea, told him that it was something similar to her. Meanwhile, the action takes us to Weavy and Lepus, who suddenly stare at the sky. Lepus immediately said that Flea had cut off contact, which Weavy then assumed was because she was having fun. Anyway, Lepus told him that the main thing is that she doesn't get angry or aggressive. At this time, Xenok was thinking about how he wanted to successfully complete the task that Espen gave him. Also, the most important thing he wanted was to get closer to her, because she is the only one he needs. He wants to be with her for a long time. The guy immediately remembered her words about her homeland being very far from here. A question popped into his head. What if Espen decided to leave? Would he be allowed to follow her if he wanted to? Looking down, he also asked why he couldn't go with her if she still refused. However, his thoughts were interrupted as Cleary appeared in front of them, right now looking shocked. Looking at the dark-haired guy with red eyes, he immediately remembered the moment he met the girl he accidentally touched. Cleary immediately turned to Xenok, telling him that if he was not mistaken, he was with the girl with pink hair. Was he right? Xenok in turn remembered Espen's words, that mages have an excellent memory, so if he meets Cleary, he will recognize him for sure. But for such an occasion, our heroine has prepared something, so he will need to say something. At this point, the action takes us back to Reuben and Flea. They were weaving wreaths at this point. The boy suddenly looked at the girl and reminded her that she told him that she needed to find friends. However, Flea smiled and put the wreath on his head and said that everything was fine because she had already found them. She stared at the castle and said that perhaps they were in the city, or maybe even in this castle. Reuben looked at her in surprise and asked if she missed them. The girl came up to him and told him not to think about anything else, because now she enjoyed spending time with him. The guy was very happy to hear this. However, at this point, he decided to start talking about what if he took her outside the castle. However, he didn't have time to finish speaking, because right now, an unknown person stood in front of them. Raising his head, the boy discovered in horror that it was the teacher, so he reflexively jumped up from the ground and covered Flea. The man looked at the student in bewilderment and asked him why he did not do what he told him to do. He also wondered who this girl was and why she was there. However, at that moment, he decided to take a closer look at her and was horrified to discover that she looked like that very divine animal. Could it really be her? Instantly, the man began to laugh madly without stopping, and soon he asked the divine animal if she could really transform into a human. Maseth looked more and more like an excellent experimental subject with every word and every second. Realizing what would follow, Reuben fell to his knees and began to beg the teacher not to do what he had planned. The man told him that he was too talkative for an ordinary shepherd boy who raised an animal. Reuben nevertheless recalled that the teacher himself said that he would not conduct experiments on people. The man told him to shut up and then asked him if he was even a human being. Maseth said to listen to him carefully. This animal is a monster in human form. It doesn't matter if he uses her as he wants. Looking at the student, he asked how he dared to lecture him. Reuben pressed himself against the teacher's leg, and the teacher told him that he was a useless brat. At that very moment, Maseth raised his hand because he was going to punish his disobedient lab assistant. However, he was unable to do this because an unknown force threw him to the ground. Raising his head, he noticed Flea, who was really angry. Looking at the man, the divine animal told him that she did not like him. A moment later, vines began to fly past him, cutting his body. Soon after, Master Maseth was tied up. In turn, he began to laugh in bewilderment and ask what kind of magic this was. Just at that very moment, Espen and Cade came running into the garden, and they were definitely surprised at what was going on here. At this point, Maseth was still screaming and ordering him to be let go. However, Reuben also fell under Flea's hot hand, and a deadly vine was flying towards him. Of course, our heroine couldn't let Reuben get captured, so she cut the vine and asked if he was okay. The guy, horrified, began to talk about how he needed help because his girlfriend. After the word girlfriend, our heroine stopped hearing him. Turning her head, our heroine noticed a girl in front of her who looked crazy. Espen immediately turned to her and asked if she was right in thinking that she was a divine animal. She felt like she had overdone it with her magic because her friend had suffered because of her. At that very moment, Flea seemed to come to her senses because she noticed that Reuben, whom she wanted to protect, ended up suffering because of her. Our heroine, in turn, told her to move away from there, and she would deal with this scoundrel magician herself. Flea decided to obey, but at that very moment, Maseth was freed and therefore immediately began to attack. However, Cade came to Espen's defense, raising his wand to block the attack. Maseth watched in horror as this happened, wondering how this guy was able to block his magic. However, Espen, who was standing behind him, decided to show him everything on her fingers, so after a while, he was lying unconscious. By the way, at that moment, the girl suddenly realized that she had no time left at all. Flea, meanwhile, approached Reuben and began to apologize, saying that she briefly lost her mind. Our heroine nevertheless intervened in their conversation and said that they needed to leave, and she hoped that they did not want to linger here. By the way, Weavy and Lippis were waiting for her. Espen also asked Flea to take a friend with them, and they would treat him. The girl happily hugged Reuben and told the man that he was kind. But it couldn't be that simple, because at that very moment of climax, Cleary appeared bewildered and asked what was going on. The man noticed Maseth lying on the ground, so he immediately turned his gaze to Espen. However, at first he did not understand that it was she, because this girl was an adult, so he asked who she was. Espen's soul sank into his heels, but to her great happiness, everything turned out much better, because at that moment she noticed Zenok, who was standing behind Cleary. Realizing that he had told most of the story, our heroine breathed a sigh of relief. The girl told him a little more, which of course surprised Cleary, but he still began to look around at what was happening. The next person he saw was a guy with blonde hair who apparently was a student of the great magicians. After that, Cleary raised his cane and deactivated their magic. Cade laughed, saying that they were found out. However, Cleary was not amused, so the man warned them that if they did not reveal their identities, he would have to report them as trespassers. Our heroine was surprised by these words, because she had given Zenok the task to tell everything to Teacher Cleary if he met him. That's why the girl looked at the teacher in surprise and asked if they hadn't told him anything. They were Chloe's friends. The man sighed heavily, but soon after, he invited the boys to go inside and talk. After a while, they found themselves at the same table, while Maseth was still tied up and lying on the floor. The divine beasts in turn finally recovered, although a few were still missing. At this moment, Cleary looked at Espen in surprise and asked if she was his daughter's friend. Our heroine confidently said yes, backing it up with the fact that she lived in Rostfield for some time. This, by the way, is the birthplace of Chloe. The girl must be about 11 years old now, and Cleary can't even imagine how much she talked about him about her father. She said that he was an outstanding royal magician, and moreover, thanks to her, she learned what the uniform of the Knights of the Heavenly Order looked like. And also at their first meeting, she immediately understood that he was her father, because she looked very much like him. She's right, right? The man was even embarrassed by these words. Everything was true, but Chloe is very shy, so he didn't know that she could say such things about him. However, our heroine said that if Cleary does not believe her, then she can tell him something that only he can know. Smiling, our heroine said that Chloe has a talent for magic, but she has not yet decided to reveal it, so she continues to live peacefully. Our heroine said that she and Chloe never had secrets. However, these words really did become the final ones. The man immediately realized that she was indeed friends with Chloe, but this could also be understood without even using lie detection magic. Espen was a little surprised, but she still remembered that Chloe's father was just as good at mental magic. She remembers Chloe telling her about it, and that her father can easily spot any lie. Espen knew that if Chloe hadn't told her about her father's skills, she would have been pulling the wool over his eyes. Anyway, the man at that moment asked if he understood correctly that they had entered here to save the divine animal. Espen said that it was true. Cleary then looked at her friend and asked if she had sent him to them so that he could help them if something happened. Our heroine laughed and said that he was thinking correctly. Besides, she thought that if he saw the other divine animals, he would believe in her good intentions. The man suddenly thought about it. He knew that Espen wasn't lying to him, but something still seemed strange. He didn't understand why, while talking to this little girl named Espen, he had the feeling that he was interrogating a knight. In any case, he still decided to ask them what they were going to do next. After all, Mr. Maseth, whom they met earlier, is by nature a very greedy person. If he takes a fancy to some interesting object, he will not let it go, even if he has to destroy them all with his own hands. Espen still didn't understand why he was hunting for divine animals. The guy said that they were informed that anomalous phenomena had occurred in this area. Espen said that she understood him, and soon after, she looked at Mr. Cleary in surprise and asked if he was interested in the power of divine animals. The man said he was not interested at all, and then he asked in confusion who Mr. Cleary was. He said they could just call him Uncle. A memory immediately popped into my head when Chloe said that her father was too kind and honest. She even decided that this was why he died. Our heroine lowered her head and said with sadness in her soul that her father was exactly as she said. However, at that moment, our heroine turned to him and asked him to keep what happened today a secret. The man nodded his head and said that everything would be fine and that he would take care of everything. Espen was grateful, but asked what if he got into trouble. Cleary said he couldn't ignore his daughter's friend, who might get into trouble. The man said that for the sake of his beloved daughter, he is ready to keep even the most terrible secret. He also said that he hadn't seen Chloe for a long time, and he was ashamed that he didn't even know her friend's name. In any case, he said that if he helped her, then he and Chloe would spend a lot of time together talking about what happened. Our heroine, of course, was very unhappy about this, but nevertheless, she realized that she would no longer be here when he met Chloe again. Anyway, at that moment, the man turned to the boys and said that he was going to interfere with the memory of Mr. Maseth. After a while, it was time to say goodbye. Before leaving, Cleary looked at Cade, remembering that he was a student of a great magician. The man said he wanted to ask him something. Still looking into Cade's eyes, the man assumed he was going to tell his teacher. After a while, the action moves to the building where Cade lives. As soon as the guy entered the room, someone addressed him. As it turned out, it was the teacher who told the boy that he had recently started to disappear quite often. The guy smiled and said that there were so many interesting things in this town that he had completely lost his mind. The man said that it was understandable, because he was now at such an age that everything was interesting. In any case, he asked the student if he had found what he was looking for. He added that he was talking about a thing related to time. The guy went to hang up his robe and said that he was still searching. After all, he reminded them that this was the reason they had come here. In any case, he turned to the teacher again. He asked about the thing they were looking for. Did it have to be a thing, or could it be a person? Still, the teacher asked him to tell him about a man with strange magic if he met one. The man said that it was definitely impossible to rule out that their target could be a human. The power to control time is very strange and still a mystery. He said that this was why Cade had to find its source, and as soon as he found something similar, he asked to let him know. The boy smiled and told the teacher that he would do the same if he noticed something strange. The action takes us back to when Cleary asked Cade if he was going to tell his teacher everything. At that moment, the guy said that he didn't really know what to do, so he asked what he should do. The man suddenly asked him if these people were not his friends. If so, he advised him to just be a good friend. It was these words that had a great impact on him and made him think about a lot of things. Anyway, the action takes us to Espen, who screamed in surprise and asked if Flea really knew the location of one of the divine animals. Flea smiled and said that it was true, she knew it very well, because she was good friends with him. Weavy snorted in confusion, saying that it wasn't strange, since they were always stuck to each other and walking around like that. Our heroine, despite their local problems, decided to ask why they split up. Flea explained that she wanted to find fire and lightning, but she doesn't like that at all. Espen was, of course, surprised. In any case, she assumed that Flea knew where she was, so she wanted to know where the last divine animal was. Flea said she could help, but unfortunately, she didn't know the names of places in this world. In that case, Zenik decided to ask what if he showed the location on a map. Flea said that he could try. Soon she had a huge map of the continent in front of her, where her friend could be located. Flea stood thoughtfully and looked at the map, while Zenak and Espen waited faithfully. After some time of thought, the divine animal finally pointed his finger at the map, saying that it was most likely located there. Our heroine, having seen the location of the last divine animal, fell into a stupor. The problem with all of this was that Flea had just pointed out the birthplace of Espen. Zenak immediately noticed that Espen's expression had changed, but he couldn't figure out why. One way or another, at that very moment, she seemed to come to her senses and began to talk about something. Soon the action shifts to night. In the house, the wood was quietly crackling in the fireplace, and the divine animals like Zenak were resting. Only our heroine, for some unknown reason, sat and watched the stars through the open window. At that moment, Lepus flew up to her, suggesting that she could not sleep. Espen immediately said that the divine animal is where her home was. What if she meets her past self? Lepus told her that she had to avoid her and that she had to do it for herself. She didn't want to just disappear, did she? The girl said she couldn't go there. Like Weavy said, they would have to lure the divine animal. At that very moment, our heroine noticed a strange thing on the street. For some unknown reason, Zenok was also awake and on the street. Our heroine assumed that something had happened to him, so she threw a blanket over herself and decided to go outside. However, at that moment, all she saw was a beautiful picture. The incredibly beautiful Zenok, against the backdrop of an equally beautiful starry sky. Espen looked at him with admiration in her eyes, and even fleetingly called him Commander. Hearing someone's voice, the guy turned around in surprise and asked Espen what she was doing there. Espen laughed awkwardly, saying that she had accidentally said something wrong. Zenok was nonetheless surprised that she called him Commander. It was strange. Anyway, our heroine looked at Zenok and asked why he wasn't sleeping. The guy said he has too many thoughts, so he sometimes goes outside to refresh himself. But what about her? Espen said that, to tell the truth, she couldn't sleep either. But when she saw him, all her thoughts disappeared. He scared her! At that moment, Zenok looked at the ground and asked Espen if she would leave here. Our heroine thought for a moment and soon said that this was not impossible, since there were no more divine animals here. At that point, the guy looked at her and asked if he could go with her. Espen said that he obviously couldn't do that. Zenok took her hand and asked why. The guy said that he doesn't want to break up with her, and moreover, he wants to follow her. Soon after, he looked away shyly and said that he thought he liked her. Espen immediately screamed in confusion, asking him what he was talking about. Because of such harshness, Zenok even became confused, and soon began to say that he meant that he liked her as a friend. Our heroine immediately seemed to come to her senses and began to laugh and pat him on the back. The guy, of course, did not expect such a reaction to his confession, so he was a little depressed. Espen knew that if she left him alone, then the only person who would support him would be his maid. Moreover, she even thought about the fact that he might be bullied again. After weighing the pros and cons, our heroine, unexpectedly, for Zinok told him that he could go with her. The guy happily said that he agreed. Espen then decided to ask him if he had ever been on a picnic. Our heroine asked him in surprise if he hadn't gone on a picnic even when he was traveling. The guy said it was true. The action shifts to the next morning. Our heroine woke up with great difficulty and got out of bed. She immediately headed to the bathroom to wash up, but as she passed the mirror, she noticed something with her peripheral vision. Turning back to look at her reflection, the girl screamed in horror, asking what had happened to her face. Our heroine understood that she had not gotten enough sleep, which upset her very much. Soon the image of Zinok confessing to her that he liked her came back to her mind. She bit her finger anxiously, thinking that there was no way he liked her in the way she thought he did. And again, she decided that this was nonsense, because when you give birth to children, they consider the one they see for the first time to be their mother. That's why she decided that Zinok was attracted to her because he admired her and thought she was cool. By the way, she suddenly thought that he could admire her as much as she admired the commander. And again, a memory appeared before her eyes, in which Zenok looked at Espen and asked if everything went well yesterday. The girl began to scream in bewilderment, thinking about when these thoughts would disappear from her head. Meanwhile, Zenok was still looking thoughtfully at the floor, thinking about Espen calling him commander yesterday. He was sure that was what she had called him. Soon after, he drew two parallels, realizing that his father was the commander of the knights. The guy immediately looked at Weavy and asked him if he knew where Espen's homeland was. The lamb said that he did not know, but Lepus in turn replied that he knew. He proudly said that Espen had previously lived in the capital. He was confident in his help. However, Zenok was perplexed and said that it was not her homeland. Lepus in turn said that it was not from me, because she lived there. Soon after a short pause, he added that she lived there until her death, of course. Zenok jumped up from his chair at this information and immediately asked Lepus what he was talking about, but the rabbit said that he couldn't tell him more. Meanwhile, the action moves to our heroine, who came to the village to meet Kade. By the way, they were just together, and the guy asked Espen in surprise if she was really going to leave the city. Espen told him that she was indeed planning to leave here for a short while. In any case, she took his hand and thanked him, saying that she didn't know if they would be able to meet, but he should know that he was a good friend. Soon after, they said goodbye, and Espen started to leave. But Kade suddenly stopped her. The boy remembered the words of the teacher, who told him that their target could even be a person. That's why, knowing that she was unusual, he asked her a question. Could he go with them? Meanwhile, the action moves to Zenok, who took out his suitcase thinking that he needs to take the most important things on the road. At that very moment, the maid burst into the room, telling the gentleman that someone had arrived to see him. At that very moment, a guy entered the room, bowed before His Highness, and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The action takes us again, but this time to the palace of Countessette. The man was reading a letter lying on the table in horror. Soon he ran to the servant with this letter and asked if what was written here was true. The guy said that most likely the Black Knight really did arrive at the estate. The action moves back a week to the Duchy of Black Knight. A man standing at the window asks if his son has finally distinguished himself. Casion, also the second-ranking knight and second-in-command, said that it was so. The man was glad to hear this, because he had already begun to think that this puppy was no longer good for anything. He soon said that as far as he knew, Cleary and Mosseth had gone to the Lord. Casion told the commander again that he was right, as always. Cessnac Black Knight stood before us, the Duke and current commander of the Heavenly Knightly Order. The man thought for a moment and looked into the distance. Soon he asked if he should visit his son. Cassian was very surprised by what he had just heard with his own ears, so he asked again in surprise. Senak told him that he had heard everything correctly. He was going there personally. It would take about a week on the roads. Meanwhile, Zenok stood in his house and read a letter that said that His Highness Duke Black Knight was on his way here. Nevertheless, the guy squeezed and threw the piece of paper on the ground. The maid asked the gentleman in surprise what had happened. The guy in turn told her to throw away the letter, and they would pretend that he had never received it. The action, meanwhile, takes us to the village, just at the moment when Kade asked if he could go with them. Our heroine asked him again in surprise and also asked why he needed it. The guy said that he just wanted to be close. Espen still didn't understand why this was happening. At that very moment, Kade took her hand and pulled her towards him, saying that he liked her. Now our heroine was in incredible shock and completely lost touch with this world. She immediately started thinking, so it turns out that he is a magician who will confess his feelings to her in the future? Our heroine soon realized that this was nonsense because he was just a child, just like Zanak. Espen smiled and assumed he meant that he liked her as a friend, right? The guy laughed and said that it was not like that at all. He liked her differently. He could even kiss her. The guy soon apologized, thinking that he should have said that he wanted to kiss her, or maybe he should have said nothing at all. Espen started screaming and telling him that he was too young and that he had too many hormones. The guy apologized again, assuming that she didn't like it at all, but in that case, he promised that he would improve for her sake. Immediately after this, he put her hand to his face and asked what kind of person she would like. Our heroine was shocked. She couldn't even imagine that the great magician was exactly like this in childhood. Espen told him that her type was definitely not like him. Cade laughed, saying that was very harsh. In any case, the guy asked to go with her. He was sure that he would be useful. After some time, the action moves to Xenok's home, who at that moment, in bewilderment, asks what happened. Espen introduced Cade, saying that he was the person joining their trip. The guy asked in confusion why they needed him. Espen said in surprise that she thought it would be more convenient with a magician. She also reminded them that they were going there alone without adults, and Cade would help them resolve situations where they would need the presence of adults. Xenok then reminded her that she could become an adult herself. Just like back then, Espen said that was true, but sometimes they might need an ID. Just at that moment, Cade intervened in the conversation and said that this is exactly what he could do. In that case, Xenok also decided to use heavy artillery. The guy said that he could arrange a pass for them because he was a duke. Now it was a life-or-death competition, and also whether they needed Cade on the trip. The divine animals were not surprised that the human world was interesting. Flea was very curious about what would happen next. Espen suddenly asked if everything would be okay, because if he were outside the estate, his father would find out about everything. The guy was immediately upset because he understood that she was telling the truth. In this case, Espen offered to take Cade with her. At that moment, Flea approached Cade and asked in surprise if he was also a divine animal. Weavy told his friend that this was not so, because he was a human, and he was a mage. Meanwhile, our heroine, for some unknown reason, sat and looked ahead with a sad expression. Xenok noticed this, so he decided to disturb her to ask why she was sad. Our heroine turned around and asked in surprise if she really looked like that. In any case, the thing is that the place they were going to was close to her homeland. As soon as Xenok heard these words, he immediately assumed that she did not want to go there. Espen in turn said that she, on the contrary, really wants to go there, but unfortunately, she simply cannot. Soon after, she turned to him and said that what she had just told him was a secret. The guy looked at her with embarrassment and said that he wouldn't tell anyone about this. Espen immediately moved away and cleared her throat, saying that they were leaving in 2 days. Although she said this quite confidently, she still really hoped that nothing would happen. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the road along which the convoy was now traveling. Of course, it was the convoy with the royal carriage inside which Cessnac was sitting. He asked how much was left. Cassian told him that there were 2 days left to the estate. The action moves to 2 days later. Just at this time, our heroes were finishing their preparations and were getting ready to leave. Suddenly, a maid entered the room and told the lady that she had a guest. Opening the door, she noticed Mr. Cleary in front of her. The man, perplexed, said that he had already asked to be called uncle. Noticing that they were getting ready to go somewhere, he asked where they were going. Our heroine told him that they needed to leave for a while. However, he looked at the girl's luggage and said that her luggage did not look like they were going for a short time. That's why he assumed they were leaving town. Espen laughed and said they were leaving town. That's right. Then the girl said that they were going to go to the Shua estate. Cleary was surprised, firstly, because they were going alone, and secondly, because it was a long way. Espen said they needed to get there. And regarding the adult, she said that he really wasn't around, but they would still manage on their own. However, Mr. Cleary said that he would help them. Espen asked about his work, to which he said that although he had things to do, he could not work for now. The man said that his and Maseth's business trip would be a bit longer. In the meantime, he was suffering from the side effects of the memory-erasing magic. And again, our heroine asked him if he was sure, to which the man said that Maseth was the person in charge, so he should finish everything himself. After all, it was he who was sent to this city to explore the area, and he went with him as an assistant. By the way, at this moment, Cleary said that Duke Black Knight was now heading here. Xenoc asked when he would arrive, to which his uncle said that he would arrive soon in general. Our heroine immediately noticed how quickly Xenoc's face changed, so she realized that their relationship was too bad. The guy immediately ran to Espen and started telling her that they should hit the road as soon as possible. Cleary asked in surprise what was going on, and Espen said that Xenoc was basically right, because it was time for them to go. The man asked why there was such a rush, to which our heroine replied that she thought the boy didn't really want to see his father. Mr. Cleary was shocked when he heard these words. He was sure he hadn't misheard, and Espen had said, "Father?" He looked at Xenoc and asked if he was the commander's son. Espen laughed and answered for him, saying that it was true. Coming closer, he told Xenoc that he really did look like his father, but he couldn't understand why he didn't want to see his father. Our heroine said again that most likely there are reasons for this, and she respects his decisions. At that point, Cleary looked at the divine animals and said that he would help them with that. To be more precise, the man said that he would stall for time so that they could escape. After some time, the commander of Black Knight arrived in the village and walked along the path to his son. On the way, he was met by Cleary and Lord Asset. They both greeted the commander, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. Cessnac immediately asked Cleary where Massith had gone. The man replied that he wasn't feeling well at the moment, so he would be taking his place, sighed heavily, and said that Massith was apparently shirking his duty once again. However, Cleary understood that his comrade's condition really left much to be desired. Anyway, the guy smiled, telling the commander that he needed to show him something. The man turned around in surprise and asked if it was really that important to show now. Cleary said it was really important, so it would be worth showing. Now Cessnac sighed heavily and agreed. He supposed he had time for it. Meanwhile, Cade was already standing at the meeting that they had discussed as a group. At that very moment, he noticed a tired Espen, who apparently was running towards him. She immediately told him everything that was happening. Cade summed it up by saying that as far as he understood, they had to leave the city without anyone finding out. Espen said he was a good boy, and that he got it right, and she also said that plans had changed, so they had to leave right now. That wasn't a problem, was it? The guy laughed and said that he certainly had no problem with that, because he was already ready to go. So they left. The evening was gradually approaching, and the sun was setting over the horizon. It was at this very time that Cessnac arrived to visit his son, but of course there was no one inside the house. Catzian, noticing this, immediately realized that things were bad. Cessnac was furious. He ordered his son to be found immediately. And again, the action is transferred to the moment when our heroine said that they should leave earlier, the guy. Although he agreed, asked if there was really a reason for the rush. At that very moment, Espen looked back and noticed 2 knights of the Heavenly Order behind her. The girl immediately turned to the boys and, bringing them to their senses, said that they needed to go to the gate immediately because they didn't have time. Cade at this point said that if he understood correctly, then they only needed to go outside the gate. Our heroine nodded her head, and soon after, the magician took her hand, saying that they should hold on tighter. At that moment, he waved his wand, and they flew into the sky. Espen was shocked by such abruptness. From the knight's point of view, at that moment, it only looked like something strange, so they didn't even attach any importance to it. Meanwhile, the guys were still flying in the sky. Espen was in incredible shock, but Xenoc calmed down because it turned out not to be as scary as he thought. However, he immediately remembered his father. He was sure that his father would soon realize that he was not in town and would get angry. Anyway, looking at Espen again, the guy decided that everything would be fine because she was nearby. Being in the sky and flying beyond the boundaries of this village, the boy was finally able to feel a sense of freedom. Espen is his savior, and he does not want to leave her side for a single step. Soon, the action takes us to the commander of Cessnac, who was perplexed by the fact that his son was not at the estate, but he sent the servants back to their homeland. Looking at Count Asset, he asked in surprise how he had managed to keep an eye on Xenoc at all. At this time, Cleary was incredibly happy that he had bought some time for Espen and the others. However, the magician didn't even think that the commander would order him to find his son. The man wondered if he should help in the search, and the question was how. Or should he go against the commander? One way or another, looking at Count Asset, He decided that first he needed to make sure that he didn't kill anyone. Then he turned his gaze to the window, where the sunset was already taking place. Cleary wondered how far away the children were already. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the forest, where our heroes have set up camp. As a result, the divine animals rested after such a journey, and a delicious soup was prepared in the cauldron. Our heroine was amazed by Cade's cooking skills, so she told him that she had no idea he could cook so well. The boy smiled and said that he was very pleased to hear that. He also added that his teacher taught him that. After that, he said that Espen told them that they needed to get to the Shua estate. But did she already have a plan of action? The girl said that she was still thinking about it. Cade nodded his head and then asked if they had left the city in a hurry because of Duke Blacknight. Our heroine sighed and said that it was so. After that, the guy said that he saw him once. As far as he remembers, he was with the teacher then, and at that moment, the Duke was beating the man as if nothing had happened. At this time, Xenoc and Lepus were peeling onions together, and they even started crying. Overall, it all happened on time. In any case, our heroine turned to Cade and told him that there are a lot of bad people in the world. Now, our heroine understood that Xenoc's character had changed due to her father's influence. Soon after, she sat down on the ground, saying that if a person has any problems, then there is always a reason for everything. Cade asked her in confusion if she had just found out about it. The guy told her that this is why you can't trust everyone you meet. You never know what a person is hiding. Our heroine looked at him in bewilderment and asked if he was talking about himself. The guy laughed and reminded her that he liked her. The girl snorted and asked him not to make her laugh. Cade asked why she didn't believe him, but the girl reminded him that the food was boiling, so it was time to take the pot off the fire. The guy immediately got to work on it. After this, Cade turned to Espen again and asked if she could command divine animals. The girl replied that she did not do so. In that case, he decided to ask how she had taken on the image of her adult self. After all, the magic was not like the one she used. That's why he decided to assume that it wasn't magic at all, but the skill of a time traveler. Our heroine at that very moment lost the power of speech and did not know what to tell him. However, at that moment, they heard something behind them. They immediately noticed that there was a strange movement in the bushes, which meant that they had guests. Cade wasn't particularly happy about this, but immediately told the guys that he was going to change their appearances, so they should be prepared. After some time, our heroine regained her adult appearance, and just at that moment, someone approached her. Turning around, our heroine noticed the commander in front of her, which left her incredibly shocked. The action is transferred to some time ago, sitting by the fire. Cade said that during the journey, they will meet many people. The guy said that no one in the city itself would care about them, but there was one problem. Our heroine interrupted him at this point and dared to suggest that things would be different in the forest. The guy said that it was. In that case, our heroine leaned over and asked Cade to use transformation magic in the strange situation. The girl then asked how long his magic would last, to which Cade replied that given his abilities, it would last around noon, but if he tried, it could last all day. In that case, she asked to use magic until they realized that the person they met could be trusted. That's right, that's what they agreed on, but Espen didn't take one thing into account. She almost had a heart attack thinking that Xenoc in adult form was his father. She thought Cade would turn him into a completely different person like Cleary. At this point, Xenoc once again noticed that Espen was feeling strange for some reason, so he turned to her and asked if everything was okay. Looking back and seeing Xenoc, the memory of him asking her if everything was okay came back to her. Our heroine blushed incredibly, but still said that everything was fine, so she asked him to move away. The guy was upset that she was reacting this way to his touch, but he still didn't resist. Just at that moment, the guy who was the cause of all the commotion dared to come out from behind the bushes. The boy asked in surprise if they were the owners of this land. All our heroes immediately grabbed their swords. Now the stranger understood that apparently he had taken a wrong turn somewhere because getting here was very unpleasant. Looking at the girl, he realized that she most likely had some unusual skills, so it seemed that she could easily break his bones. Of course, he threw his dagger on the ground and, smiling sweetly, said that he came in peace. Soon after, he bowed and apologized for dropping in, so suddenly, he was just hungry and had followed the smell. The boys looked back and glanced at the cauldron of soup, and soon they exchanged glances with each other. Our heroine immediately told the stranger that if he did something stupid, she would hang him from a tree. The guy said he understood, and after a while, he was happily devouring a bowl of soup. At this time, the divine animals lay and did not move. Lepus suggested that they should pretend to be toys, and Flea asked what it was. One way or another, soon the guy finished his portion, and putting the bowl on the ground, he said that it was very tasty, so he was grateful to them. The guy then said that his name was Zack, and that he was an A-rank mercenary. He promised to repay them for their kindness. Our heroine looked at him and asked where he came from. The guy said that he was coming from the Porte estate, which is nearby. Zack said that the local forests are very large, so it is easy to get lost. He initially had a guide with him, and he also lost his money and compass. Mercenaries. These guys get requests for a certain type of work. Of course, as a rule, they are hired to kill animals, monsters, or to accompany. Our heroine immediately decided that this sounded too stupid. A mercenary who got lost along the way? It was funny because he was an A-rank mercenary, as he said. Also, judging by this guy's things, he has been doing this kind of work for a long time, so Espen is sure that he would not allow himself to be robbed by some guide. Zack interrupted Espen's thoughts at this point, telling her that he thought she was being too wary. Soon after he asked in surprise where they were going, Espen asked in confusion why he cared. In that case, the guy said he would tell. The guy smiled and told them that he was heading to the Shua estate. Our heroine, of course, was wary and asked why he was going there. Zack decided to remind her that he was a mercenary and had an order there. It seemed logical. However, our heroine looked at him thoughtfully. Zack asked what was wrong, so he asked them to tell him what was bothering them, and he would help them. Espen said that they were also heading there. However, since they were coming from far away, they knew nothing about these lands. The guy suggested that they needed information, and he could share it with them. The Shua estate and the neighboring residents are going crazy because of a criminal who is setting fires. As he knew, this attacker was a man of about 30 years old who first of all sets fire to the forest. Soon after, he happily returns to the city and sets fire to private houses on the estate, and then to the aristocrat's estate. Hearing these words, our heroine was in incredible shock because literally just now, the fate of her family had been described. The guy said that he couldn't catch the criminal because of this. The aristocrats gather mercenaries to protect their estates. By the way, he is one of them. Zack said that they had chosen a bad time to travel, so he advised against staying at the estate. Soon after, he looked at Espen and told her that if his instincts were correct, she had some ability with a sword. He suggested that she carry out the order with him, since he was looking for some comrades. Our heroine gave him a confident no. She explained that she was not eager to work with an A-rank mercenary who had managed to lose his wallet and compass. She also added that if everything he told was a lie, then she would certainly not become his comrade. The guy laughed, saying that it was painful and apologized. However, it was true that he was hungry and lost. He also assumed that his information was not enough to repay them for their delicious food. The guy soon went on his way and said that he would definitely settle accounts with them the next time they met. Our heroine asked herself in surprise what the next meeting meant. They had no reason to see him again. But as it turned out, they were wrong. The very next morning, they were surrounded by knights and, of course, Zack was among them, who told his sister that they had finally met again. Now he asked if they needed his help. Our heroes left the forest and finally arrived at a place located near the Shua estate. They reached the Sorte estate. Standing in line to cross the border, our heroine realized that they had about 3 days left to travel to their destination. The heroes decided to use shape-shifting magic so that there would be no problems when entering the estate. Anyway, Cade had an ID card stating that he was a mage's apprentice. Finally reaching the knight to let them through, the man looked at them in bewilderment and put forward a ban on crossing the gate. Cade said in bewilderment that as far as he knew, the photo was taken by presenting an ID, and 2 more people could pass through one at a time. The man said that this was indeed the case, but due to the recent situation, the rules had been changed. Of course, it was about the arsonist, so the knight asked for forgiveness and hoped that they would understand that this was being done for the safety of the estate. As he explained from their rumors, the arsonist could be a magician, and for this reason, they carefully check the identity of each person and their credentials. The man said he wanted to see the Cade comrades' IDs. Our heroine immediately thought about it. What to do? She had no such thing. In turn, Xenoc of course had it, but then everyone would find out about his identity. Looking around, the girl realized in horror that they would not succeed. And this was the final stop. She even thought about saying that they were mercenaries accompanying Cade. Just at that very moment, another knight approached the captain and began to whisper something in his ear. At that moment, he screamed and pointed his finger at Espen and ordered the knights to seize her. The girl realized that it was too late to say anything. In this way, our heroes were surrounded by a whole bunch of knights and were at a dead end. Our heroine certainly wouldn't want to find herself in such a situation, and everything turned out that way because they were taking so long to answer. As the deputy commander of the Knightly Heavenly Order, she had never found herself in such situations. Looking around, our heroine understood that they were fighting ordinary soldiers and that it would not be difficult to break out of the siege, but then they would be considered arsonists. The captain of the Knightly Order looked at the suspicious guests and asked them to show their identification, otherwise they would take them into custody. Our heroine began to calm them down, saying that they were just ordinary mercenaries. The man then asked to show the mercenary card. After these words, an explosion occurred in Espen's head. What a great excuse she had come up with. What to do now? Now the knights will have even more questions than they could have had. Just at that very moment, Espen heard a familiar voice behind her. Turning her head, she saw Zack, who was smiling at her and telling her that they met again. The guy asked if they needed help. After a while, they were standing and talking. The guy laughed at the fact that such a coincidence had happened again. Moreover, he didn't even think that he would have the chance to repay them for their help so soon. As soon as Zack noticed his acquaintances, he immediately went to Captain Jacob, telling him that they had not seen each other for a long time. So he asked how he was doing. Anyway, the guy turned around and said that the people they had surrounded were his comrades, and they were new. Immediately after this, all the knights began to leave at the captain's command, which meant the problem was over. Of course, Espen accepted the help, but she was still vigilant. She never trusted mercenaries. When their emperor became seriously ill, they hired mercenaries to quickly find a magician who could cure his highness. In the end, all these mercenaries turned out to be greedy and avaricious traders, ready to sell you for pennies. But fortunately, they managed to find an honest mercenary. One way or another, the girl was surprised and could not believe that the local aristocrats hired just anyone. Zack felt Espen's piercing gaze all the time, so he said that he felt sad because of the way she looked at him. Our heroine apologized, but she had not had the best experience of working with mercenaries. The guy sighed and said that he understood her. Moreover, he added that he himself does not particularly like his colleagues who surround him. It's ironic, but he's currently looking for a traitor, Espen asked him again. The guy said that this man stabbed his comrade in the back. However, Zack despises such people, so he is going to take revenge on this freak. Cade suddenly whispered that he used magic, and this man was telling the truth. Zack suddenly asked them if they had a place to stay. The guy said that he knows this city well, and also he remembers that they are heading to the Shua estate. He added that the check at the entrance there is even stricter than here. But just like here, he can help them at the Shua estate, because they can get inside under the guise of his colleagues. After some time, our heroes went to the bar to eat and discuss everything. Zack once again reminded his new acquaintances that they needed to get to the Shua estate so they could help him on the way there. Our heroine said that she was grateful to him for his help, but they still had an urgent matter, and unfortunately there was no time. Zack said it was fine, but if they agreed to help, he promised to stay out of their way. Espen said she'd rather get the mercenary card herself. The guy laughed, saying that it wouldn't be easy to do, because of the story with the arsonist, the guilds temporarily stopped issuing cards. He smiled again and said that he needed help on the road, but once they arrived at the Shua estate, he would say goodbye to them. With a heavy sigh, our heroine realized that they had no other choice, so she asked what his purpose was. The guy turned his head from side to side, and as soon as he was sure that there were no extra ears, he said only one word: arsonist. Zack, at that very moment, said that the arsonist was actually his comrade. After a while, the action moves to the bedroom. The others were already asleep, but Espen couldn't stop thinking about the arsonist. The girl immediately wondered whether this man had anything to do with what had happened to her family. Was he the criminal? With these thoughts, our heroine nevertheless fell onto the pillow, thinking that she needed to get some sleep. The action takes us to another room, namely Xenok's bedroom. He was also awake, and in turn wondering why Espen called him commander. This question was constantly spinning in his head, and did not give him peace. But at that moment, someone came up to him and asked if he could not sleep either. As it turned out, this person was Cade, who oddly enough also did not sleep that night, because he had his own questions. The guy said that he would like to talk to Xenok. With some disdain, Xenok looked at Cade and told him that he was not interested. The mage asked in surprise, did the guy really not want to listen to him? Even if it concerns Espen? Xenok asked in confusion. What did that matter? The guy said that he can see that Xenok likes her, but nevertheless he likes her too. Xenok immediately jumped out of bed, asking her not to make fun of him. He said that he was sure that Cade was just using hers. The magician looked at him and said in surprise that he had never thought that he was so hot-tempered. It turns out that he was only pretending to be so timid. The guy said it was pretty sneaky. Xenok snorted and asked him to speak for himself, since he was the one trying to use Espen. Cade said that he really doesn't understand what he's talking about, because then he wouldn't be helping them. He also said that he wants to be friends with him. Looking at Xenok, the mage explained to him that if a quarrel arose between them, Espen would be on his side. Xenok looked at Cade in confusion and asked what he wanted to tell him. He immediately warned him that if he wanted to say nasty things about Espen, he had only himself to blame. Cade sighed and sat down on the bed, then said that he was not insulting the person behind his back. He just wanted to talk about her strength. Doesn't he think that's unusual? Xenok asked in surprise if he was really talking about her becoming an adult. The guy nodded his head. Cade told him that Espen had previously explained to him that she had borrowed powers from a divine being. But until now, there had been no human who could do such a thing. That is why the magician assumed that it was all about the power of time. At that very moment, Xenok remembered the words of Lepus, who had spoken of some death of Espen. In any case, the guy looked at the magician and asked why he was telling him about this. Cade explained to him that the power of time is dangerous. He doesn't know if Espen knows, but using such a power by a human can lead to terrible consequences. The guy concluded by saying that Espen could get hurt, so they had to intervene. Soon after these words, Xenok sighed and agreed with the magician, and after some time, they went to bed. The action takes us to the next morning. Our heroine, like the other guys, was sitting at the table and having breakfast. The girl also noticed that nothing had passed, but Xenok already looked exhausted. By the way, looking at this ordinary meal, our heroine wondered, why do these two look as if they have been friends all their lives? Or maybe it seemed to her. One way or another, her thoughts were interrupted by Zach, who also woke up and went downstairs. After a while, they were walking down the street, and Zach asked where they were from. Espen said, from far away. It was cold, but she told him he didn't need to know. The guy was surprised, and said that they were now friends, so why not be a little friendlier? Espen reminded that they were talking about help, and they hadn't come to get acquainted. Zach thought about it and said that she was right. They would help him with the arsonist. By the way, our heroine asked to tell more about him. The guy said that there are rumors that the arsonist is a man of about 30 years old, and this is not true. He is a magician, but the arsonist is also a skilled swordsman, so he is called a swordsman-magician. Our heroine was surprised by this because it is a very rare phenomenon. A swordsman is a person who simultaneously wields a sword and magic. Zach continued to say that most of the time, the arsonist lives near the sea, and our heroine understood that the criminal was very talented. The guy added that their target was born in the north, and his character is very complex. And moreover, at times, he becomes gloomy. At first, he acts nice to people, but soon he reveals his true nature. Even though mercenaries are usually bad people, the arsonist crosses all boundaries. Zach said that one of his comrades reported seeing him heading towards the Shua estate. If they don't mind, they should hurry. Thus, our heroes covered their way in 3 days, and finally, the Shua estate began to appear before them. They were close. Our heroine looked at her house with sorrow in her soul, thinking that there was very little left to get there. But it didn't matter, because she wouldn't be able to go there and see her parents. At that very moment, her thoughts were interrupted, because at that very moment, lightning struck over the estate. Our heroine asked in confusion what it was, and Zach apologized for forgetting to tell lightning was a common occurrence in the estate these days. Espen was nonetheless surprised that lightning was covering the estate on a normal, clear day. It was very strange. Just at that very moment, Lepus said that it was the power of a divine animal and that it was emitting lightning. Flea happily said that it was Rika. Lepus also said that compared to the others, this creature is very dangerous, so she should be careful. He loves lightning and fire and hates people. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the estate, where the maid walked along the corridors and looked for her mistress, not understanding where she could be. Meanwhile, little Espen was sitting under the table, giggling, and saying that they couldn't find her. At that very moment, a man looked under the table, saying that he had found her, but the maids were scared. Of course this man was Count Shua, who took his daughter in his arms and asked where her mother was. The girl replied that she was in the garden. Walking to the window, the man suggested that his daughter was too bored to be in the estate all the time. Espen sighed and nodded her head. The man looked out the window, hoping that the criminal would be caught as soon as possible. Then, he said that they called the best mercenaries, and they had to spend a lot of money to hire a magician. Looking at his daughter, he noticed that Espen was just looking at him with surprised eyes. Count Shua realized that she didn't understand anything at all and laughed. Right after that, he explained to her that as soon as they caught the evil criminal, then they would be able to walk outside as before. Hearing these words, the girl was incredibly happy because it was already more understandable. At that very moment, their conversation was interrupted by someone knocking on the door. Soon the door opened, and the butler greeting the count told him that Baron Sahaman had arrived. The man turned around in bewilderment and reminded that he had asked not to be disturbed. Espen looked at her father, who at that moment even scared her a little. Anyway, Count Shua put his daughter down on the ground and told her that she should go to her mother. She immediately ran out of the room, and Baron Sahaman happily greeted the count, asking him how he was doing. The girl ran out into the corridor and seemed to be heading towards her mother at first, but she decided to go into the next room and sit there for a while because she had an idea. Closing the door behind her, she giggled, thinking about how she could scare her dad like that. At that very moment, a loud cry was heard, saying that he was saying that it was impossible to do that. He was perplexed and said that this was one of the advantages of having relatives. Count Shua said that if you add up all the money that Sihaman borrowed from him over 10 years, you get the amount of the state budget for 6 months. The man, perplexed, said that he was doing everything for the sake of the estate. Then why didn't they believe him? He promised that his idea would only bring profit. However, the count told him that he had recently learned that Sahaman was addicted to gambling, so he lied about being an investor. As he passed the man, he said that if he managed to pay off all his debts, then he should stop gambling. Before closing the door behind him, the count said that if he made another such request, he would order that he not be allowed into the estate. Espen was very shocked that Dad was so angry that he even slammed the door. Soon she ran to the door of the room where her dad was to see what was going on. In the room, she saw Baron Sahaman, who was incredibly angry. He asked how Count Shua dared to talk to him like that. Meanwhile, the action takes us to our heroine, who was standing in front of the estate. Of course, looking at her native estate pictures from her childhood, in which she was next to her parents, began to appear in her head. Zinok saw how depressed Espen was about being here, and that made it hard for him too. At that very moment, Zach approached them and said that they had been traveling for several days, but in the end, he still hadn't heard anything about Zinok and Cade. As far as he could tell, one of them was a mage and the other was a swordsman. The guy asked what kind of swordsmanship Zinok had, and he hoped that he was at least on his level. Zinok was speechless at that moment, but at that moment, Espen came up to him and asked Zach not to ask a bunch of questions, because this guy will become the best swordmaster. Putting her hand on his shoulder, she said that she knew he could handle it without any problems, because she believed in him. Zach was amazed, because he knows his little sister's skills are incredible, so if she has so much confidence in him, then he wanted them both to become mercenaries. While Zinok was incredibly red in the face with embarrassment, our heroine told Zach to fuck off and stop annoying her. At this point, she also added that he had never seen her handle a ball before, so she wanted to know how he knew she was good. Zach was surprised to hear that not all swordsmen are the same. He was confident in her skills just by looking at her sword, and besides, her eyes spoke volumes. In any case, now they needed to gather information about the arsonist. What did they think about it? Our heroine said that they would work on this task separately. The guy then said goodbye to them and said that they would have to meet here at sunset. Espen in turn turned to the boys and said that they must find the divine animal. Our heroine recently noticed that lightning had appeared in the sky again, and she immediately remembered the words of Lepus. The girl suddenly thought that the abilities of the divine animal and what the arsonist did were very similar. Are they connected? She immediately thought that this could be the reason why the arsonist was in this estate. Or maybe she even thought that it was more complicated than that, and the fire was the fault of a divine being. In any case, she would never know. She hoped that Cade and Flea, who had gone out together to look for traces, would find at least something. Sitting on the bench, she thought about how tired she was. Still, there were too many thoughts in her head at once. At that moment, Xenoc came up to Espen and told her that she looked tired. He wanted to know if she was okay. Putting his hand on her face, he also said that she was all red. Espen at that moment stopped even hearing her own thoughts. She sheepishly assured herself that it wasn't because of him that she blushed. They needed to finish their business as soon as possible and return to their previous images. At that moment, when our heroine turned her head, she noticed a strange man who was muttering something under his breath. Looking at him, she realized with horror that she remembered this man because he was her uncle.